related to a very important annual institution here at the City of Portland, which is the city's charitable campaign. And so before we begin today's council session, I'd like to read that proclamation and then have Janet and Jane come up and either fill in any additional blanks or answer any questions that anybody may have. Whereas the city's charitable campaign was established in 1989 by then Commissioner Mike Lindberg as an opportunity for employees to give money to charities through a payroll deduction, and whereas the city's charitable campaign represents an easy and important avenue for city employees to support the charities in their community that matter the most to them, and whereas 15 charities will participate in this year's campaign, most of which are umbrella organizations representing multiple charities with more than 600 charitable organizations represented in the campaign. And whereas these groups help make positive changes in areas including, but not limited to, the environment, education, healthcare, social justice, housing, arts and culture, child abuse, equity, human rights, and whereas last year city employees donated more than $281,000 through this campaign, and whereas city employee donations have totaled more than $2.7 million over the last 10 years, and whereas the commitment to charitable giving is demonstrated by city employees year after year, now therefore I, Ted Wheeler, Mayor of the City of Portland, the City of Roses, do hereby proclaim September 13th through October 6th to be citywide charitable campaign in Portland, Oregon, and encourage city employees to participate in the city's charitable campaign. So Janet and Jane, I don't know if you wanted to come up and say a few more words about this campaign, and I have this fabulous proclamation as well for you. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. We're happy to be back to actually thank you for the support for this year's charitable campaign. We were able to also present some information to the city's bureau directors about the campaign and remind them that that our campaign has a couple of distinguishing features. First of all, it's choice. It is not an organization that really limits employees in the choice. So the 600 charitable organizations, all of the people who applied to be part of our campaign were recommended for approval by a committee that we work with, and it is also voluntary. So we encourage people to participate, but even if they have other charities that they want to give to, then this is just a reminder this time of year that that city employees are giving and that this is something they like to participate in. I know at yesterday's work session, Commissioner Udaley was reminding all of us of some of the extra work that people have done for those communities that are affected by the Eagle Creek fire. We also wanted to point out that we have Megan Humphreys here from Earthshare, and one of her charities that participates in that umbrella is Friends of the Columbia Gorge, and we also have Oregon Food Bank that is actively working to support that area, and they're also one of our charities. So again, it's even though the charitable campaign has been around for a while, it's contemporary in how people choose to be giving to the crises that we see in our communities today. So we very much thank you for your support.
Thank you so much. And I just want to say how appreciative I am, not only of your efforts, but also of city employees citywide who are willing to make this kind of a commitment. I think it speaks highly about the kind of people who work for the City of Portland. So thank you for that. I have this fabulous document for you. I don't know where you put these, but congratulations. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Yeah, thanks a lot. Appreciate it. Thank you. I think Nick will be right down. Is that right, Carly?
He's doing about 10 minutes.
Very good. All right, good morning, everybody. This is the Wednesday, September 13th a.m. session of the Portland City Council. Carla, please call the roll.
Saltzman?
Here.
Udaley?
Here.
Fritz?
Here.
Fish? Wheeler?
Here, and it's my understanding Commissioner Fish will be joining us very shortly. I'm going to condense our 10 paragraphs down to a couple of sentences. Please, everybody, respect other people's testimony. Please do not interrupt other people's testimony. Please do not interrupt the deliberations of the council. If you do so, you will be asked to leave. If you do not leave when you're asked to do so, you're subject to arrest. Nobody wants that to happen, so let's all just be respectful of what people have to say, whether we agree with them or not. If you agree, a thumbs up is good. If you disagree, a thumbs down is sufficient. Assume that there will be people here who you do not agree with. We're a big city. We have diverse points of view. That's part of the fun of coming to a city council, is to hear viewpoints different than our own. If you are a lobbyist and you're testifying, you must let us know that you're a lobbyist per council rules. If you're here representing an organization, that's also helpful as well. There are two opportunities for people to address the council. The first is called communications. People sign up in advance with the council clerk's office, and they can come in and for 3 minutes talk about whatever they want, from a weighty issue to the weather. It's 3 minutes. You own it. You can use it however you'd like to use it. There are also the first readings of reports and resolutions and ordinances. Those are also opportunities for people to testify. And if one of those captures your fancy and you'd like to testify, please sign up with the council clerk for the purpose of testifying. Ordinarily, we try to give people 3 minutes, but if we're compressed for time, sometimes we have to cut that down to 2 minutes. So I encourage people to think about 2 minutes of testimony, and then if you're lucky and get 3, well, you can go a little slower. So with that, we'll start with communications. Carla, please call the first individual up.
Item 1001, request of Boo Rigney to address council regarding issues with bad behavior of people on the streets.
Mr. Mayor, Boo couldn't be here today. She asked if I would take her.
I'll allow it. Come on up. Could you state your, and everybody needs to state your name for the record. We don't need your address or anything like that. Good morning, sir.
Good morning. I'm Paul Fishman. I live in southeast Portland, Sunnyside neighborhood. I'm also involved with Hawthorne Neighbors, which is a coalition of merchants and residents in the area. I've talked to you before several years ago about some of these issues, and I have two other folks here from the organization today. It's nice to see all of you. We appreciate the work you do. I just want you to know that. What we're talking about today is not about homelessness, houselessness, et cetera. It's about behavior. We don't care who it is, what their situation is. It's about behavior. And this is not simply a set of police issues. These are issues that are across all bureaus, in our view, citywide, and need to be dealt with that way. We've been working with the police bureau, and we very, very much appreciate and support their efforts to date with their limited staff and budget. I want to take just a brief amount of time here, and I want to talk about what I call the 3 illities of Portland. We pride ourselves in Portland. Many of us have sore shoulders from patting ourselves on the back about the wonderful things that we do here. In my neighborhood, it's a very, very highly rated walkability score. So walkability. The reality is that metric does not take into account how people feel about walking in their neighborhood and whether or not they choose to walk in their neighborhood. And what we're seeing in our neighborhoods around Hawthorne, and I know in other parts of the city, is that many people are uncomfortable or even afraid to walk in their own neighborhood. I've talked to people, elderly people, who instead of walking to the New Seasons on Hawthorne, they get in their car and they drive to the one on Division because they don't feel safe walking down Hawthorne. So a walkability score is meaningless if people don't want to walk. Livability. We pride ourselves on livability. We have livable neighborhoods. Well, you're going to hear from a couple of people today about their view as families, as parents with children, what it's like living in the neighborhood, and the kinds of fears and things that they see, the crime, needles on the street, people who bother their children, et cetera. Sustainability, again, This kind of stuff leads to a non-sustainable situation where you have people who move into a neighborhood because of the livability and walkability, but then realize they don't want to stay there because it's not a sustainable situation. So we need to think about these things and how to deal with them. We've been working with the mayor's staff and Nick with one of you, Commissioner Fish, one of your people. And basically, we've lost the battle for our neighborhood this summer. We're going to continue to organize. We're going to work through the winter, hopefully with all of you, and try to have a better summer next year in the neighborhood. Please bring us into the conversation. Don't leave us out of the conversation. That's what we're asking. Thanks very much.
Good. Commissioner Fritz?
Thank you. Mr. Fishman, I remember a couple of 2 or 3 years ago,
Yeah.
you and your neighbors were here with the very
Yeah.
same issue, and the solution was to have a walking beat
Yes.
in Hawthorne. Is that still going on or not?
The walking, thank you for asking that question, Commissioner. The walking patrol worked very, very well. It was a unit of originally 10 officers who were recruited from the Bureau based on a set of criteria, and they were put out on the street walking a beat every day. They got to know everybody. They got to know the kids on the corner. They got to know the merchants. They got to know the people who live in the neighborhood. Everybody knew everybody on a first-name basis. And the problems really, really resolved over the course of 2 years. And then that program was cut because it was not sustainable from the police bureau's point of view. We would love to have that walking patrol back because it worked. And now things are worse on Hawthorne and in that neighborhood than they were before the walking patrol. So, yeah, thanks.
And if I could just add 2 bits, and I appreciate your working particularly with Mark Nelson on my staff.
Yes.
As recently as yesterday, he was in contact with the Police Bureau
Yeah.
about increasing the patrol presence from 10 to 4 in that particular location
Yeah.
near the parking lot. And I'm not mentioning the name of the business because it's not their fault. They just happen to have a parking lot in that location that's an obvious gathering point. We did just increase funding for 6 new police patrols. Hawthorne is on that list.
Good.
I want you to also be aware that the city council significantly increased funding for things like litter collection, needle collection, graffiti abatement,
Yeah.
in addition to the new patrols. And it is a clearly and publicly stated goal of mine to move back to the full community policing model,
Yeah.
which over a period of many, many years, the city has retrenched from. So I agree with you that both reduces opportunistic crime, it helps keep the peace, and it also helps reconnect our police bureau with the community they serve. So we are eager to work with you. And I want you to know we are keenly aware of the problems on Hawthorne, and we take them very seriously.
Yeah. Mr. Mayor, thank you for that.
Thank you, sir.
We are also working closely with Seraphy Allen in your
Yes,
office.
yeah, and I should have mentioned Seraphy.
Yeah, that's fine.
Shame on me for not doing
And really,
that.
one of
That's
the main
correct.
things, as I said, is communication, two-way communication. I was trying to work on that, on police community engagement and outreach when I was working on the, with the COAB whole thing. That's the key. We try to reach out as often as we can. It's difficult for the Police Bureau and others to take the time to reach back. We need to somehow figure out how to do that better.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you for your testimony.
Thanks.
Next item, please, Carla.
Item 1002, request of Howard A. Newman to address council regarding issues with bad behavior of people on the streets.
Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Howard Newman. Mr. Wheeler and Commissioners, I come before you on behalf of the Hawthorne neighbors, at least 2 entities on Hawthorne Boulevard, my family, and really countless businesses and other persons, including certain homeless, who have seen their neighborhood afflicted by an unchecked threat to our health, safety, and livelihood. Excuse me. I refer specifically to rampant illegal and unsafe behavior in Southeast Portland by certain bad actors. First, I want to be clear. I refract the issues that we are confronting through the very same lens that my 6-year-old does, behavior. Socioeconomic status is not part of the calculus in addressing criminal conduct. For example, it matters not if I were to bark directly at two young children that they should, quote, go kill themselves simply for using a sidewalk, something my children experienced. Indeed, it would be my conduct that matters, not my background or even whether I have a possessory interest in a house. The same is true for everyone. I am not anti-homeless, I am anti-criminal. The focus is not on the person, but the behavior. And there are plenty of behaviors that you should consider. Sunnyside Elementary janitors' duties include daily needle collection, ignoring open container violations, individuals smoke crack, and couples have sex, all in plain view. Local area daycares modify parts of field trips to ensure safety, and residents seek immediate medical attention after getting a bite from a transient's dog. The effects are tangible. Employees have left businesses for fear of their safety. Hawthorne patrons have stated aloud whether they're going to return. And the reason we moved from Irvington was so that my wife could walk to work, something now relegated only to certain daylight hours. You, Mr. Fish, can appreciate the following. When my wife feels safer on A Street in Capitol Hill in DC, more than 35th on Sunnyside, that speaks volumes. This council must do more than declare its courage and resolve in addressing these issues. I can represent that a nascent electoral coalition is budding, nourished along the spectrum of nuisances to outrages and the perceived lack of concrete and permanent steps undertaken by our leaders. An expansion in homeless and transient programs combined with a more robust police presence must occur to promote health and safety. I highlight, community policing cannot occur without more police. Citizen walking patrols are not sustainable. Business associations paying private parties for an abdicated core government function is not tolerable. Though I concede I may be ignorant, I offer some potential solutions in writing that I ask be placed into the record. I have copies for the commission. May I?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Very good, thank you. Next
I'll take
item,
those. I'll
please,
take
Carla.
those. Item 1003, request of Neil Banerjee to address council regarding issues with bad behavior of people on the streets.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning.
Hi, my name's Neil Banerjee, and I live in the Hawthorne neighborhood with my wife and two boys, 4 years old and 10 months old. I'm also representing the Hawthorne neighbors, and this is a follow-up to a presence a month ago. We live around the block from 36th and Hawthorne. We moved to the neighborhood about 4 years ago, and I've seen a rapid decline in safety for our family and livability. Today, I'm going to spend my 3 minutes to give you a pulse of our neighborhood and how citizens are mobilizing to try to solve these issues. But we need your help. The topics I'd like to cover today are related to family safety, livability, and the confusion around how to deal with these issues in the city. A few days ago, I had to take a mandatory training at work. It was related to hostile work environments. It got me thinking about how we should be applying the same principles to our kids' neighborhood activities and environments. With the proximity to Sunnyside School, preschool surrounding the area, and the Belmont Library, we have one of the densest packed, kids-friendly areas. My family was recently victimized by a person that attacked our home and tried to attack contractors working on our home. These are not one-off incidents. Violent behavior and sexual harassment are reported on Nextdoor, a popular social media platform, on a weekly basis. A noble attempt at citizen walking patrol was started, but they are not enough. A week after they started, a pool of blood the size of a doorway mat was found dried up on the hood of a car in front of Sunnyside School after a resident was attacked by hoodlums that were at Sunnyside Park after the park was closed. With the growing encampment across from Ben & Jerry's, families fear walking nearby. People blocking the sidewalk by Fred Meyer's force people to walk or wheelchair into the street in an already dangerous and deadly road. What types of PTSD will kids have who are sexually harassed on the street or see violent behavior in their living areas? Families, including my own, don't feel safe. The safety issue also dovetails into a livability issue. In the same area, we have seen an increase in open-air drug markets and sales. Stabbings are now taking place when drug deals go south. Southeast Uplet had to fence their entire area down due to alcohol abuse, drug use, and disturbing violent behavior. Needles can be found discarded in playgrounds and areas where children play. Feces and urine are left on sidewalks and areas that children play. We can do better than just letting this happen in our city. Citizens are gathering and trying to clean up the street in fear of losing businesses from Hawthorne, but it's not enough. I'll close by describing the confusion between law enforcement, the DA's office, and the mayor's office. Our police are trying to do their best job, but I keep hearing from them that they're not able to enforce the sort of city violations that are caused on the street or misdemeanors, smaller crimes, and then the DA is not prosecuting those. What happens there is then we have a decrease in the number of recordings of these things. There's no way to track if we're actually making an impact or not. The last time we were here, we were told that a walking patrol would be initiated, and you addressed that just recently. But it seems like only reactive police activity is occurring. I know a solution is hard and it takes time, and you mentioned that before. But I request that the city publishes the plans and timelines for execution for their solution for improving the safety and livability in our neighborhood. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Let me just make a couple of comments because I'm seeing a consistent theme here, and you've taken the time to come here and present this information. And it is important, and I do think it's important that people know the city is not just sitting on its hands. So I'd like to share with you some of the things we have done, while I acknowledge it is not enough, because I've seen with my own eyes the problems that you mentioned do still exist. But first of all, let me tick off a couple of things. The presentation that the three of you provided made clear that you understand there is a humanitarian crisis and that we do need a compassionate response for people who are vulnerable, who do need support, people who live with mental health issues. There are many people, as you well know, who've been impacted by the economy and other circumstances. This council has stepped up like none other. Over the last 5 years, the general fund support for shelter, for housing, for addiction services, for mental health services through a Home for Everyone has gone up 165%. Over the last year, 74% alone for our general fund contributions. So we are now in the Home for Everyone to the tune of about $27.5 million. Commissioner Saltzman, as Transportation Commissioner, has spearheaded an effort that really came from our conversations with the Lentz community, but it impacts the broader community as well, to get rid of and properly dispose of derelict RVs, which has become a problem, not so much in the Hawthorne neighborhood, but in many surrounding areas. As I mentioned, we have significantly increased the foot patrols, and it's one of my core values that we will return to a full community policing model, and I think that will actually go a long way towards addressing some of these issues. As you acknowledged, under Commissioner Fritz's leadership in the last budget, we significantly increased the number of park rangers, so that addresses some of the issues in the parks, and we just heard from some folks in Laurelhurst Park, not too far away, that has had a significant positive impact on these livability issues, whether it's the trash, the needles, graffiti abatement. We added $2.5 million to our most recent budget specifically for the purpose of addressing that. We've convened government partners that heretofore had never communicated, ODOT, PBOT, TriMet, the Police Bureau, the Sheriff's Office, Union Pacific Railroads, lots of different city bureaus, all the bureaus that own real estate, and we've started combining our efforts and trying to work on this together as an effort, because we find if we don't collaborate, it really is almost impossible to make any progress. And last but not least, and here's my ask for you, I have made it very clear to the Portland Police Bureau that they will enforce existing codes. And that includes structures in parks and right-of-ways, things like that. And I sent that directive to the Police Bureau, I believe, over 6 months ago. And I understand that historically those codes have been inconsistently applied, if at all. I have directed the police bureau to enforce those codes. So if ever a police officer tells you that the mayor's office is not allowing you to enforce codes, please get that officer's badge number so that I can reiterate my very clear opinions with regard to the enforcement of city codes. I expect the police bureau to enforce city codes, and I've said so through written directives previously, and that's been well reported in the press. But I do hear what you're saying, and I want you to know that I do feel and understand the frustration of the Hawthorne community, and I share it, and we will continue to work together to address those issues.
Mayor, may I add one comment?
Commissioner Fish, and I'm really appreciative that you and your colleagues took the time to come in today. I'm very appreciative.
Thank you.
If I could add a comment, and I apologize for being a little late this morning. I had a doctor's appointment. So I walk to work now, and I actually don't use a car very often. And so I see more things that you see as a pedestrian that you know, when you're driving a car, sort of whiz by. And so I appreciate many of the concerns that have been raised by all three people who've come here to testify. You know, we have a chance under this mayor in the next couple of budget cycles, particularly if the economy continues to expand. Knock wood, economy's doing well, and that will be made clear through the fall bump, but hopefully through the regular budget. We have a chance to make good on a commitment the mayor made to really bolster community policing. And the essence of community policing, going back a long time, is that personal relationship with an officer, and then the community members not only knowing the officer's name, but being part of the team. And you know, having an officer walk a beat is a very powerful thing. And we've been, you know, last year we had a huge crisis of staffing, and we made some changes in terms of money for recruitment and retention. But anyway, I think we all are committed to a vision of community policing that has more officers out of their cars, on the street, interacting with people. And it just has many, many benefits. And frankly, most people want to know the name of their officer, their beat officer. It's a hugely important relationship. Upstream stuff and downstream stuff. So the second thing I just want to mention is, in the most recent point in time, none of us here are tolerant of behavior that crosses the line into illegal behavior, wherever it happens. And the mayor has been very clear about enforcing the law. But I will say one thing we have learned in Portland, and it's the same up and down the coast, is there has been a huge growth in what we call chronic homelessness. And the data that you know, because it was published, is people that are battling addiction or mental health crises or both, the dual diagnosis. And we can talk a lot about how we got here, and the truth is a lot of systems had to fail for that to happen. There's a lot of people that have to account for that at the federal, state, local level. But they're on our streets, and putting aside people whose behavior crosses a line. You know, almost 70% self-report having one of those barriers. And what we've learned is the most successful way to get those people into a better place is to give them an apartment with intensive services. And it's very interesting. It also saves the taxpayers a lot of money, because when someone becomes stable and when they reclaim their dignity and they're on the path to whatever, sobriety or tackling their addiction or you name it, or they get the support they need, amazing things happen. And we're, as a suite of actions this council is going to take in October, we're going to set a very bold goal for investing in permanent supportive housing. It's the missing piece, and it will provide for the most compelling people that we see on the street that really should never be on the street, a place to go. And I believe that's an important next chapter in how we're going to tackle this, and we'll need your support to make that happen. So thank you.
And Commissioner Fish, I just, Jennifer brought down the release from August 4th that announces the community policing pilots, and the Hawthorne Business District is in fact one of those 6 areas, along with Springwater Corridor, Laurelhurst, Old Town, Chinatown, North Park Blocks, and Ankeny Alley. So the Hawthorne Business District will have its foot patrol. Thank you. Thank you all
Can I
for
make
coming.
just one quick question?
If it's very, very quick.
Very brief.
Yeah.
in terms of, criteria for success, what I'd love to see is a timeline for when you expect things to happen. And obviously, I work in a business where my customers ask me for roadmaps all the time. We usually don't hit our date all the time, but it helps to understand when changes are going to occur. And then the second thing is to have consistent metrics published on the changes that are actually happening, so we can know, are these programs really helping our city or not?
Fair enough. Agreed.
you.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Next item, please.
Item 1004, request of Injured and Pissed Off to address council regarding reverse Polish logic.
Good morning. My name's Injured and Pissed Off. And the last time I was here was July 19th of this year. Mr. Mayor, you weren't here at the time, but I brought to the attention that there's 2 publications of the city council meetings. And I found out from the Multnomah County Board clerk that the county doesn't advertise in newspapers because it costs them $480 some odd, she said. And of course, the city's paying twice that for these 2 publications, and those are only the ones that I'm knowing about. That's every week they're paying $1,000 roughly for 2 publications that could be done online. I don't know the excuse for that. And I found out the reason why my first 2 meetings weren't published with my correct name, Injured and Pissed Off, the full name, 4/26/17 and 6/7/17, and even the announcer wouldn't pronounce my name because I went to the county clerk after talking to the city attorney here in the board meeting room, and he told me that the city attorney was deleting my name. Well, I went to the city clerk, and she said, oh, no, it's the 7 attorneys upstairs. Well, I went upstairs to see them, and none of them would talk to me. And the receptionist, she said, well, she felt uncomfortable saying my name with women and children being present. And I said, well, just how uncomfortable do you suppose I have felt in my service animal being attacked 7 times? And the last dog attack, I broke my left hip and 2 fractures to my spinal cord, and that's the reason why I can't walk very well. And she wouldn't say anything, and of course now they're pronouncing and printing my name. But I'm still wondering why the city's paying $1,000 a week to have the publications. Maybe you'd like to address that, being that you answered some of these other people with their comments and concerns.
Yes, sir, I'd be delighted to. Not everybody has access to the internet, and we feel it's very important to get the word out through multiple channels.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for coming in. Next item, please.
Item 1005, request of Larry Swick to address council regarding health and safety matter in the Goose Hollow neighborhood.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mayor Wheeler, Commissioners. My name is Larry Swick, and I live in the Kings Hill Historic District of Goose Hollow. There's a serious long-term construction project going on the 2100 block of Southwest GM Hill. There's a copy of some of the impacts of it attached to my printed testimony here. And I also dropped off a copy of that for each of you last week as well. Live in a 4-story 1908 historic building. And there have been serious long-term noise and health problems and property damages to at least 2 different units in our building during the past 7 months related to ongoing construction. The recent weeks, it's been centered 20 feet below our residence. Here are some lessons learned and some suggestions respectfully offered for the City Council and the Mayor to consider. Construction companies allowed to operate in Portland but not headquartered in Portland should be required to meet stricter permit standards. They have less interest in a community they do not live in. Construction permits should have a requirement that any staff of any contractor or subcontractor who lies about the hours they are permitted to operate should receive a $500 fine per occurrence. The city should hire more Portland Police Bureau officers dedicated to noise issues. There's only one. That's not enough for a growing city the size of Portland. Rank and file police officers should receive annual training and briefings on noise issues. Rightly, they focus on serious crime. However, they know almost nothing or very little about noise issues currently. The city staff should respond promptly to constituents. I left messages on August 30th and 31st for the mayor's office, still waiting for a response. When people do not receive a prompt response or some kind of response, it's very slow. They lose faith in local government. The mayor should implement a Meet the Mayor forum where for 1 hour weekly the mayor meets with Portland residents. Cities should provide free online access to permits for major new construction in Portland instead of charging $20 and making them come to the Portland downtown building for the city. The city should ensure people within 2 blocks of a major new construction project to be notified in writing of the project. We had no notice in writing whatsoever. We do get notice of design changes for signs a block and a half away. And lastly, the city should weigh major new construction projects closely prior to approving them, especially if they're in extremely densely packed urban neighborhoods such as Kings Hill, especially in today's increasingly work-at-home environment. Growth will and needs to occur, and we need new housing, but at what cost to Portland residents and the integrity of existing historical buildings? So these are for your for your consideration as the 5 policymakers for the city. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We appreciate your testimony. All right. Have any items been pulled from the consent agenda? Please call the roll.
Saltzman.
Aye.
Udaly.
Aye.
Fritz.
Aye.
Fish.
Mayor and colleagues, I want to call out one item, which is the grant agreement with Cash Oregon. And some people may be wondering why we are providing financial education, counseling, and tax preparation for low-income residents of our community. The answer is we are woefully underutilizing as a percentage of eligible members of our community the so-called earned income tax credit. And through this investment, we're actually allowing people to qualify for an entitlement, a federal benefit, which then helps them in a pretty significant way. So this is one of a number of programs where the city invests in helping make sure that struggling families get get benefits to which they're entitled. And when they do, we all win. So I'm very proud that the council invests in good organizations like Cash Oregon. Aye.
Wheeler.
Aye. The consent agenda is adopted. Item 1006, please.
Adopt the Transportation System Development Charge Update 2017 Rate Study, establish an updated rate schedule, and amend code effective January 1, 2018.
Commissioner Saltzman.
Thank you, Mayor. With Portland growing by leaps and bounds, improvements in our transportation system become key in providing travel options to accommodate that growth while continuing the challenging work of meeting our Vision Zero goals. System development charges, or SDCs, are an important resource in this effort, as that growth helps pay for the improvements needed in our transportation system. Consistent with Oregon state law, Portland has strong SDC programs in all of our infrastructure bureaus. That includes parks, water, environmental services, and transportation. It is important that we take the time to review the effectiveness and rationality of the transportation SDC program. And over the past 2 years, transportation staff have been doing exactly that and are now before us with an updated methodology and project list for our consideration. Staff and our consultant will share a presentation with us, and it is a little bit dense, but I feel it is appropriate as it is such an important program, and interested members of the public should understand all the thinking and analysis that went into the proposal. Following that, we'll open it for testimony and, of course, answer any questions that council has. One quick amendment I'd like to place on the table now, and I think you all have copies of that, relates to universities and colleges, and specifically is in response to how the changes in the program are impacting Portland State University. The amendment will replace the square footage calculation currently in the proposal to a student count basis, a student count calculation. The amendment reads, replace Table 4-3 as shown in page 37 in Exhibit A, as well as the proposed TSDC rate schedule included as Exhibit B with the attached.
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. Thank you. Staff have prepared the language, and as I said, you have it all in front of you. And finally, I am out next week in observance of Rosh Hashanah, so I would ask that this item come back for its second reading and vote on September 27th. With that, I'll turn it over to staff and our consultant, or our director, Leah Treat.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner Saltzman, Mayor Wheeler, and the rest of the City Council. We do have a comprehensive presentation for you today, and I am joined by Kendra Breland and Deb Gallardi. Kendra is from Fair and Peers, and she is the lead planner on the update, and Deb from the Gallardi-Rothstein Group, and she is our technical specialist. So what I'm going to do is provide an overview of the program, including how SDC charges are instrumental in helping us achieve our strategic planning goals. Kendra and Deb are going to discuss the TSDC project list, the primary changes to our methodology, the proposed rates, and how we compare to other cities. I am then going to close the presentation and open it up for questions from you all. And finally, we do have Pia Welch, Mary Helen Kincaid, Laura Becker, and Elliot Aquai Scott to testify on the topic as well. So I'll start with a quick overview of what SDCs are. SDCs are one-time fees that are paid by new development. The fees cover a portion of capital costs for building public facilities such as streets that will serve the needs of future residents and other users. In assessing TSDCs, local governments have a number of goals. Continue the public policy that new development should pay a portion of the cost of facilities that it requires, assure that public facilities are constructed within a reasonable time frame so that the system continues to provide mobility for everyone, and provide developers and builders predictability regarding the type, timing, and amount of required fees. And unlike the SDCs for the Water Bureau and BES, PBOT's SDCs are done on a prospective basis. In other words, we collect in advance of building those projects that enhance capacity. And it's also important context to note that funding coming from House Bill 2017, Build Portland, and Fixing Our Streets will largely be used to maintain existing assets. SDCs are not eligible for those uses. They can only be used to expand capacity as required by law.
Could I ask you a question? So the SDCs in this case, you're collecting those resources. They're not necessarily for projects immediately adjacent to those developments. It's going into a fund for citywide development strategies. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, I just wanted to make that clear. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So when I came to PBOT 4 years ago, I led the Bureau through a development of a strategic plan, Portland Progress. It's now in its second iteration, and Portland Progress guides our efforts to fulfill our mission of ensuring that Portlanders can get where they need to go safely, easily, and sustainably. TSDCs are a very important piece of achieving goals outlined in Portland Progress. As we'll describe later in the presentation, the project list includes a number of projects that align with the strategic initiatives at the heart of our strategic work plan. In 1997, the council created the first multimodal TSDC, allocating total project costs among 4 modes: motorized vehicles, transit, bicycles, and pedestrians. In 2007, the council updated the TSDC and gave priority to pedestrian and bicycle modes because of their important contributions to overall mobility in the community. At that time, the rate was set to recover about 40% of the transportation demand created by growth. The current program is based on a 10-year list of TSDC eligible transportation improvements. The TSDC revenue has helped fund the construction of improvements to support residents, freight, businesses, commuters, and students all over the city. The 2007 program did its job in guiding how the TSDC program should be managed through 2017. As we look towards 2018, it's important that we update the program to ensure it meets Portland's goals over the next decade. Today, we are presenting our proposed update for the 2018 through 2028 program. The program update has grown out of recently adopted out of the Transportation System Plan, the TSP. The TSP process developed the overall project list that was based on Portland's core values regarding mobility, equity, safety, sustainability, and shared prosperity. These same values also deeply informed the TSDC project list. Our city's strong commitment to public engagement sets Portland apart. In line with this tradition, the TSDC project list we are presenting is the result of robust public involvement. First, this list is informed by the overall community involvement that we conducted as part of the update of the TSP. We conducted numerous meetings and listening sessions with neighborhoods, businesses, and community organizations, as well as our city modal committees. We visited many of these groups several times to ensure they knew they had a real voice in our update. And to boost more participation from communities that do not traditionally participate in civic processes, we hosted an online open house over a 2-month period, inviting people to review the project list, provide feedback, and learn more about how SDCs will affect their communities. We used Facebook ads to encourage Portlanders to participate in the open house. And as a result, more than 33,000 people used the ad to click through the information about the TSDC update. The online open house received more than 240 comments, more than any other update we've done. Finally, we also engaged our Bureau and Budget Advisory Committee as an important sounding board for the TSDC update process. Throughout 2016 and 2017, we presented to the BBAC with project updates and solicited their input on our proposed changes. With feedback from all of these different sources, we feel the project list reflects many of the diverse needs and opinions of Portlanders. And now, if our technology is working, we want to show you a short video that exemplifies the tools we use to develop the project list.
Have you ever wondered how all those new buildings impact our transportation system? All new developments pay Transportation System Development Charges, or TSDCs. These are one-time fees paid by developers when they build something new. The fee covers part of the cost of building our transportation system, things like roads, sidewalks, bike lanes, and public transit infrastructure. TSDCs are only one piece of the bigger puzzle that helps fund the resources that all Portlanders use. In addition to TSDCs, developers pay fees to help build parks, sewer, and water infrastructure. The fees are based on how many trips the new development will create. For example, a single-family home will have much less impact than a large grocery store, so the fee is substantially less for a home. The greater the impact a new development will have on our transportation system, the higher its rate. So new developments pay fees to improve our transportation. But where do those fees go? They pay for specific projects that are on the TSDC project list. The list is updated every few years with input from the public. Each project on the list is expected to be built using a combination of TSDC funds plus other funding from grants or other sources. Recent projects that were built using TSDC fees include new sidewalks on 136th Avenue, parts of the MAX system, improvements to Northeast Cully Boulevard that enhanced pedestrian and bike safety. TSDCs are just one tool that helps pay to build Portland's transportation system, along with federal and state grants, gas tax revenues, local taxes you pay, and other sources. The city is currently updating the way it assesses TSDCs and the rate at which developers are charged. It is also updating the list of projects that TSDC revenues can fund. We want a list of projects that Portlanders actually want, that benefit all parts of the city and meet the needs of our diverse communities. And we want a list of projects that have grants or other financial support, so it's more likely that these projects actually get built. The Portland City Council will make final decisions on the updates and is expected to finalize and implement the amendments by mid-2017. It is our hope that the updated TSDC program will make it easier to build Portland's transportation system to benefit all residents. With so much development happening all over Portland,
Sorry, I didn't hear you.
What's that last slide? That's a cartoon showing where the council is. My hair's not curly for a start, which I thoroughly object
Commissioner
to.
Fritz?
Commissioner Saltzman looks very female, and I don't know what's happening in the commission.
Commissioner Fritz, may I just say that I actually was heartened by that graphic. It was a significant upgrade in terms of me. The last time I saw my caricature in any official capacity, it was actually a picture of the deputy director of PBOT superimposed on my picture. I have one question for our honored panel. You know, from time to time, government gets a bad rap, and we're accused of talking to ourselves or using language which is not accessible. And we all know what TSDC means, and we get it. I just wonder, is there another way to talk about systems development charges that might actually resonate more with the public? Do other cities call it something else that's more user-friendly? And ought we maybe just, Mayor, to think about that, because it
Christine Leon is nodding violently, so. Impact fees.
Impact fees, developer impact fees? Mm-hmm. Well, I'm all, motion. So I would encourage us, you know, Mike Houck and I have a ongoing lively discussion about the best way to talk about green infrastructure. You know, and are there other ways of saying green infrastructure that don't quite sound as wonky?
Yeah.
And I'm all for moving towards something like developer impact fees or impact fees. I just think they're more accessible than TSDCs.
Yeah, they certainly are.
And it's taking nothing away from an outstanding presentation from you today.
Yep, thank you for that feedback. I agree.
I also just want to acknowledge and appreciate the Bureau for understanding that if things are put into cartoon form, I'm much more likely to understand your point.
You
So
notice
thank
how
you.
much it caught our attention. Could I just ask a question? I know that what I've got in my packet is the June 9th version of Exhibit A, and I understand you've been working with Parks to make some amendments since then. How are those incorporated into what we're voting on today?
I believe the amendments have been fully incorporated.
Okay.
For the trails and,
And for the definition of a park and those kinds of things?
Yes.
Thank you.
correct?
So, yes, yes.
Thank you. All right.
It'll be in the rules that.
You have to come up to the microphone, otherwise we can't get a caption.
So it will be in the rules that are going to
Oh,
be
right.
formalized, but they're not part of the council package. Yeah.
And then I'm glad I highlighted that because this does give you permission to then change the rules in the administrative rules
Exactly.
from now on.
Yep.
And presumably the council at that point would get a notification that the commissioner in charge is changing the rules?
We'll take direction from our commissioner on how we take the rules to council or adopt them through our typical standard input.
Yeah, I'm
process.
fine if you do it that way. I would like to know that they have changed.
Sure.
Thank
You're
you.
famous now. Could you state your name for the record?
Yes, so I'm Christine Leon. I'm with the Portland Bureau of Transportation. I'm the group manager for the Development Permitting and Transit Group.
Thank you. I just want to make sure the fan mail goes to the right place.
Just the cartoon.
Okay. So, to continue with the presentation, the TSDC, or impact fee update, will allow us to spend money more quickly on projects that matter to the public and keep our transportation system evolving with the changing needs of our cities. Thus, we're asking you to adopt the rate study, which includes a project list, an updated methodology and rate schedule, and the associated code amendments. The remainder of the presentation will go over the important details about the update, including the program's project list, the underlying data, and how the rates are assessed. Many of these updates respond to an insightful program analysis that was conducted by PSU in 2015. Finally, we have representatives from our Bicycle Advisory Committee, Freight Advisory Committee, and the Bureau and Budget Advisory Committee for testimony. We'll also be joined by a representative of the Development Review Advisory Committee. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kendra Breland, and she's going to discuss the project list.
Okay, thank you, Leah. So Oregon System Development Act requires that SDCs be based on a methodology that demonstrates consideration of an adopted capital improvement plan or CIP. This TSDC project list kind of serves as a CIP required under Oregon state law. The project list is the foundation for the TSDC program, since TSDC funds can only be used to pay for projects that are on that project list. We are required to update the SDC program every 10 years to ensure that the program is current in terms of scope, schedule, and cost of identified projects, but also to ensure that the program is adequately reflecting the impacts of new development. While other SDC programs such as parks do update their project lists more frequently, we think that 10 years really strikes the right balance between the time that it takes projects, transportation projects, to get through the design and construction phases. So right off the bat, the main observation of the program is that it includes a substantial increase in the number of overall projects. The 2007 program included 43 projects, while the 2017 program includes 169 projects throughout the city. Some of the high-profile projects that are on the list include the Central East Side access and circulation improvements, the St. John's Truck Strategy Phase 2, the Northeast Cully Boulevard improvements Phase 2, the Brentwood and Darlington Safe Routes to School, the Outer Division Corridor safety improvements, and the Southwest Vermont Street ped and bike improvements. In the following slide, I'll give some overview of how the project list was created, including some of the considerations that went into it. The projects on the TSDC project list come from a combination of the TSP and other citywide plans. The TSP was built around the center strategy, which focuses investments within the city's identified centers. This strategy recognizes that growth makes the most sense when the city, in parts of the city that offer high levels of transit service, walkability, and options for biking and getting around. As Leah mentioned in her remarks, we're a mature urban environment, and so we need to give people choices in how they move efficiently throughout the city. A central tenet of the TSP was providing more equitable transportation system that helps serve traditionally underserved communities. The TSDC project list embraces this core value of the TSP. The TSP also has a strong focus on topics like Vision Zero and structuring its investments to move towards a future that has fewer serious injuries and fewer deaths on the overall transportation system. The TSDC project list has a strong emphasis on projects that improve safety and efficiency of the system. This slide really summarizes the overall process for creating the TSDC project list. Projects on the list are just a subset of the projects being built and constructed within Portland today. There are many projects on the TSP and that are being built that are not funded by TSDCs. We built the TSDC project list from an initial universe of 366 projects throughout the region with an estimated capital value of $5.6 billion. These projects were then evaluated for their eligibility to be included in the TSDC program. And on the slide, we kind of show those filters that we went through. First of all, is the project planned to be constructed in the next 10 years, since this is a 10-year program?
Could I ask you a clarifying question? So you said the universe of projects comes from around the region, so it's not just the city of Portland.
Correct. Some of the projects are regional in nature. For example, trail projects, I think all of them are located within Portland's jurisdictional boundaries, but I would
Okay, so
prefer to step on
this
that.
is a city process. There's no overlap with JPAC or Metro.
Correct.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay. So again, going through these filters, first, is it going to fit within our 10-year construction window? Secondly, does it add kind of person trip capacity? Is it benefiting development in Portland? Because that is a requirement of TSDCs, that they serve future growth. And then thirdly, does the project do more than simply fill potholes or maintain the system, as those sorts of expenditures are not actually eligible under state law for TSDC funds? Once we kind of go through these filters, we landed on 169 projects that could be included for inclusion in the program. These projects have a capital value of $4.5 billion. It's important to note, however, that each of the projects that are in the program are going to be funded through a combination of sources, not just TSDCs, but also grants, state funds, and other kind of sources of funding. The TSDC is just one tool that helps to pay for construction of Portland's transportation system. Once other sources are factored in, the 169 projects were eligible for a total of $589 million in TSDCs over the next 10 years. So this slide really shows kind of how the TSDC project list is allocated across the city. Following on the equity discussion, there's a sizable portion of projects that are being directed towards East Portland. Some of the example projects include the I-84 path extension to Gateway Green, the 122nd Avenue corridor improvements, the Division Midway Connected Centers project, the Outer Stark Safety and Access Transit project, and the Outer Halsley ped and bike improvements. This slide now shows kind of how the TSDC project list is distributed by mode. As you can see, there's a strong mix of projects that serve all modes. Improving conditions for walking, biking, and transit were also balanced against needs to improve conditions for automobiles and freight. PBOT received substantial input on earlier versions of the project list from residents as well as the business and freight communities. We took those input and added additional projects onto the project list in response to those comments.
Could I ask you another clarifying
Absolutely.
question? And I believe you stated this right up front. This is for new infrastructure. In other words, we can't spend it on filling potholes. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
But on that note, Mayor, I've never seen a request for operations and maintenance for new transportation facilities, and I would very much encourage you. We do have a city policy that says all new facilities should get operations and maintenance. So this is not doing that is how we got into the mess we're currently in, and let's correct that in the future.
Thank you.
So now we're going to change gears a little bit here and talk about another topic, which is the TSDC methodology. The updated methodology is based on an improvement fee-only structure as provided under Oregon state law. In these slides, we'll talk about some of the fundamental data, methods, and assumptions that underline the rate methodology. Simply put, an improvement fee structure constitutes a cost per new unit. The new unit that we're using here is specifically person trips, and more specifically, the number of person trips that are generated during the PM peak hour. So, first of all, why person trips? While Portland's Transportation System Development Charge Program has always been multimodal, this update is the first time that the program will be derived from actual person trip data. Last December, we came to Council, and Council provided PBOT staff with direction to shift to a person trip model for the TSDC calculations. Moving from vehicular trip data to actual person trip data provides a much more complete picture of how Portland's transportation system is used. The images on this slide provide a simple illustration. Cars don't make trips, people do. And how the people travel really matters. So as you can see on the picture on the left and in the center, you can kind of see this is people driving in single occupant vehicles. And so in that middle picture, you can just see that the cars have been stripped away so you can see the people making the trip. By contrast, if we look at the image on the right where people are traveling by bus, you can see that they're using a lot less space. And so their impacts on the system is much, much less. Our end goal has been to help Portland to improve its TSDC program to better reflect how people travel and structure the program to provide a more robust and multimodal project list. The program also shifts in measuring trip making from the daily to the PM peak hour. This shift reflects a desire to measure the impacts during the time when the transportation system is most taxed. So just thinking about a trip made during the middle of the night probably doesn't have as much impact on the system as one made at 5 p.m. And the other piece here is as we move to person trip data, the data is much more robust and available for the PM peak hour. In the next few slides, Deb will talk more specifically about how the rates were developed.
Thank you, Kendra. And I apologize, as you can see from the chart and on the screen, it gets really dense here. We're no longer talking about cartoons. We've got very complex formula system here. That's the current methodology. And part of that complexity was because it was designed to determine costs and SDC eligibility by mode. And when I talk about mode, as Kendra said, it's cars, walking, bikes, et cetera. The new methodology does simplify things, the way the SDCs are calculated while maintaining the essential elements needed to comply with Oregon statutes. Under the new approach, the capacity costs from the TSDC project list are spread over the growth in trips over the 10-year period to determine a system-wide rate, multimodal. This is for all modes together. This rate then serves as the basis for development of TSDCs by land use type. As was described in the video, different land uses have different impacts on the system. A single-family home generates fewer trips than a grocery store. And so the TSDC methodology takes this into account and determines rates specific for each land use based on its estimated impact. We'll talk more about the rate schedule later in the process. One of the requirements of Oregon law is that the methodology demonstrate consideration of capacity costs needed to serve the demand of future system users specifically. These are development impact fees. The previous slide described how we calculate the new capacity costs per person trip. It's then important to compare that to the existing system value per trip to ensure that new development is not being asked to pay for a higher level of service than the city is currently providing. To determine the existing system value, we relied on information from PBOT's Asset and Status and Conditions Report, which includes a comprehensive inventory of the system, things like sidewalks, pavement, bikes, et cetera. The total existing system value was estimated to be $9.8 billion. To determine the existing system value per trip, we divide that value by the forecast, or by the current number of person trips during the peak hour, which from the Metro travel demand model is estimated to be 1,300. The result is a base level of service of about 19,500 per trip. Additional investment by the city up to this level is needed to maintain the current level of service and equitably fund additional system capacity for new development. As I described previously, the TSDC rate is determined by dividing the new capacity cost from the TSDC project list by the growth in PM peak hour person trips over the same period. As Kendra discussed, the updated TSDC project list includes approximately $589 million in capacity increasing cost over the next 10 years. To estimate the growth in trips, we use the 2012 Metro model to estimate total person trips generated by jobs and housing, and then performed a detailed allocation of growth for the city out to the year 2035. This forecast was adopted by the City Council as the official forecast for use in the travel demand model. Since the SDCs are based on a 10-year period, this forecast is then scaled back to a 10-year period through 2027, which estimated growth would produce 70,630 additional PM peak hour trips. So that's the denominator of the equation. We divide the cost by this growth in person trips, and the result is a rate of $8,347. It's important then to compare that rate back to the existing system value per trip of $19,500, and you see that's significantly lower, which basically means the capacity costs included in the project list may be fully attributable to servicing the needs of future growth within the planning period. Based on the rate shown in the previous slide, the $8,000 rate, this slide shows the calculated TSDCs for 3 different types of land uses: a single-family home, a medical office building, and a grocery store. Again, as we discussed, different land uses have different impacts on the system, and we measure that by person trips. We have data that tells us that a typical single-family dwelling unit generates just over 1.2 person trips during the PM peak hour, which results in a fee of $10,280. Similarly, industry data shows that a 15,000 square foot medical office generates about 58 peak hour person trips, resulting in a fee of about $933,000. Person trip survey data, either national or Portland specific, are available for selected development types only. Where survey data is not available, we use other industry data on vehicle trip rates and convert those to person trips. It is the intent of PBOT to eventually compile a full data set of person trip counts for all land use types that are included in the TSDC schedule.
Can you go back to that slide?
Yeah.
Are you going to, at some point, show us the before and after?
I
These
will
numbers-
show you.
These numbers are more meaningful if there's a comparison. This represents an increase, a decrease,
Yeah,
whatever.
I will talk a little bit about that later in the presentation for a couple land uses.
But I'd be particularly interested in these three. I mean, the medical office building of $1 million, I don't have any context for that. That's a big number. Is that
Yeah.
more or less or roughly the same?
Well, the current, I can tell you for the typical household that the current fee is about $2,800. And
We have that data, so if you want, we can let Deb get through her presentation, and then I can ask Christine Leon to come up and go over some examples for you. Does
Yeah,
that
I
work?
think it's helpful because my experience in these hearings on impact fees is that there are often winners and losers. And then people come forward and say, I think we're overpaying or we're not paying enough. And then the other thing is we often compare how other jurisdictions treat it. You know, I have been surprised from time to time when people howl about impact fees that we learn that they would pay more, you know, if they lived in places like Tigard and Lake Oswego and the like. So how this changes the status quo versus going forward, and then some sense of how we match up with some of our suburban cities, other neighbors. Just
I
to
will
have
definitely talk about
Just to
that.
have context on this.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. So while funding 100% of the eligible project cost would allow all 169 projects on the list to be funded, as Leah mentioned, the TSDC program has always relied on leveraging state, local, and grant funds to support portions of the projects. Feedback as part of this process, from residential and commercial stakeholders agreed that funding at a 50% level balances the impacts on development and the transportation system. As you can see, a funding level of 50% would raise approximately $294 million over the next 10 years and would reduce the rate to $4,174 per person trip. This slide then just shows those same three land use types with the 50% funded level, and you can see that the fee for a typical single-family dwelling unit would be reduced from over $10,000 to $5,140. Okay, I'll turn it back to Kendra to talk more about the SDC schedule.
Great. And in this section, we're going to talk about the overall rate schedule. So the rate schedule is really where the rubber hits the road from the perspective of what a developer pays. It's the chart that specifies rates for land use categories. As described earlier, the fees are based on the number of trips generated by unique land uses, as estimated earlier by actual person trip data where available, or derived from ITE person trip data, the next best source. The proposed rate schedule includes 27 land use categories. These are similar to the current program, although 14 categories were either eliminated or consolidated, and some new categories were added based on stakeholder feedback. So we wanted to highlight a few of the biggest changes. First, for the residential categories, we created two single-family rates, one for households larger than 1,200 square feet and another for smaller homes. There has been substantial interest in recognizing that not all single-family homes have the same impact. It is reasonable to assume that smaller homes tend to have fewer occupants and could be reasonably expected to have a lesser overall impact on the transportation system. While not enough data yet exists for us to definitively set more varied rates by square footage, we believe that the city can start moving in this direction. Recommended actions in this update are to set a fee for smaller homes similar to multifamily homes. The program will also continue to exempt affordable housing permanently, as well as accessory dwelling units through mid-2018. Moreover, we think there is merit to the city beginning to collect new person trip data for a variety of housing types, such that more varied rates can be set in future updates.
So I'd just like to compliment you on doing that, which of course is similar to what we've done in parks. And just a heads up, you have to think about what happens with a renovation that then changes whether it's over or under 1,200 square feet. I'm sure it looks like you've already thought of that, but
Yes.
how are you currently proposing to deal with that?
And I wanted to see, did staff want to speak specifically to the code?
Oh,
'Cause this
I'm
is
sorry.
for-
Okay. I'll wait till later. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Okay, and relative to, the update also thought a bit about non-residential rates. This update consolidates shopping and retail rates in recognition of the changing nature of many retail centers and the needs of small businesses. Under the existing TSDC rate schedule, there are several land uses which can create complexity when tenants change. Under the proposed rate schedule, categories have been combined or eliminated and for increased cost predictability to businesses applying for tenant improvements. One final major new element to this update is the person trip adjustment. As was discussed at the December meeting, in moving to a mode-neutral, person trip-based TSDC program, it is important to recognize that how development within the central city and other designated centers have less of an impact on the overall transportation system. The way we approached this is by evaluating the space efficiency of walking, biking, and other modes. In a mature urban environment, expanding roadways is often not feasible. Thus, it is important to figure out how we can help people move, more people move within the same amount of space. The factors on the screen show the difference in space usage by mode. Carpools use less space than drive-alone trips. Bikes use 88% less space, and transit trip, on average, uses a staggering 97% less space. Based on the space efficiency calculations on the prior slide and the mode shares estimated for centers relative to the rest of the city using a combination of data from the Oregon Household Activity Survey and the Metro model, the update recommends TSDC reductions of 33% for eligible uses within the downtown and 8% for centers and areas proximate to light rail stations. These fee adjustments will incentivize the right development in the right areas of the city, reinforcing the goals of Portland Progress and the TSP. The city doesn't take lightly these fee adjustments, as they recognize that they reduce the amount of TSDCs that can be generated over time. These adjustments are offered to the types of development that are most likely to benefit from nearby transit service and the more walkable, bikeable nature of these areas. Multifamily, commercial, and light industrial areas that are paired with mixed use and built to within 0.75 of maximum floor area ratio. This structure is consistent with the city's comprehensive plan goals to focus growth in the central city, other centers, and areas nearby light rail stations, and to shift away from drive-alone trips to more environmentally sustainable modes. I'm now going to transition back to Deb, who can give some perspectives on how these proposed rate updates affect Portland's position in the region from the perspective of affordability.
So, this chart here shows you both the current TSDC for a single-family home and the proposed. And you can see that the current, which is at the very low end of the chart, is about $2,800. In the last TSDC update, the rates were capped at this level in order to generate a fee that was then near the middle of the range of comparison of other communities. Since that time, staff research has shown that the TSDCs in other areas have increased, while the city's rates have remained unchanged, and that results in the current fee being at the lower end. The proposed fee, as you can see, moves slightly more towards center.
Can I ask you a question on that? Go back to that slide. I know that the argument we often hear is that you have to look at all the costs in the basket. And obviously, the cost of dirt in Portland tends to be more expensive than in other places. And you add other costs, regulatory costs, charges, fees, and the like. And so I guess I understand conceptually that. That's one way of measuring, apples to apples. But when you see a chart like this, and we are somewhere like below a third of what Beaverton is charging for impact fees, these are the identical fees? So there's no, that they're not adding some other component of it that we don't?
Correct. Yeah, that's correct. And in the next slide, we'll look at the full, all the systems together.
And what is the short version of why Beaverton is charging close to 18,000? I mean, why there's such a gap between what we charge in Beaverton?
Well, I don't know Beaverton's situation, but, there's obviously in that part of the metro area, a lot of infrastructure needs. And, your project list is based on just prioritized projects within the 10-year period. Other communities will look at both a longer view and not sort of cap the project list. They will look at the full, potentially, list from the TSP, for example. So part of it depends on the mix of projects and the funding level. Also, what we're recommending here is a 50% funding level. The current funding level, I believe, was based on 40%. So in part, that's why yours are lower relative to others.
Yeah, it's just interesting. I mean, we get these charts at budget time, and there's a narrative that some people have about how just irrationally high our fees and charges are. Now, we can always do better. There's always customer service issues. There's always value issues. There's always, but I'm reminded when we do our annual utility report, and people seem to be shocked that you pay more for water in a number of suburban areas. And now, the public doesn't quite look at it that way. I mean, it still comes down to what's the cost, what's the affordability component within the place that you live, and I get that. But I do think I think the regional data is important because it raises interesting questions. And that's an interesting question, why we are a third of what Beaverton charges. So thank you.
And this is apples to apples. This is just transportation,
Absolutely.
city to city. Okay, thank you.
And the next slide is also apples to apples, but now we're
Adding it all.
building on the other infrastructure systems for which you charge SDCs, and that the other communities were including those on top. So you can see in this chart that Portland is more towards the center in the current, and that's because the other bureaus have increased their SDCs in recent years, and the total SDC cost for a typical single-family home currently is about $25,000, assuming it's not in the central city. So with the increase that's proposed for the TSDC, you would move up one position but still remain in the middle.
Commissioner Fritz, does this reflect the increase in Parks SDCs that the council adopted but deferred?
Yes. Oh, no, we didn't. It's currently what we're collecting. We deferred it for a little while,
But then we put into place. So this includes the increase that the council agreed to.
I believe so.
It does.
So Gresham is listed 3 times in 3 different bars. Beaverton is listed twice. Are these truly comparators?
Yeah, so Gresham has different geographically based charges because, for example, Pleasant Valley and Springwater are kind of, new developing areas as opposed to the more mature infrastructure that's in the city proper. And so they charge in that basis, and the same with Beaverton, that they have a separate charge for South Cooper Mountain because of the significant infrastructure needs specific to that area.
Interesting. Thank you.
So expanding a bit now to include other types of development fees, as was mentioned, the cost of development goes beyond just the SDCs. So this slide excludes the new inclusionary housing fees shows that the current total fee burden for a new 4-story apartment valued at $4.2 million would be approximately $750,000 with the new TSDC in place. In this case, the TSDC would account for $125,000 of that total, up about 19% from the current TSDC program. And we have one more example that shows, in this case, a 6-story apartment with retail on the ground floor, valued at $6.3 million, would be assessed total fees. Again, this is SDCs plus other development fees, excluding the inclusionary housing fee. The total fees are about $1 million. Of this amount, TSDCs would account for approximately $160,000, up 26% from the current TSDC program. Now, it should be noted that, as Kendra pointed out, there's a number of adjustments that and discounts as part of the new program, and if this building were located in the central city, it would qualify for a 33% reduction in the TSDCs.
What do you mean by inclusionary housing fee?
I'm going to have to defer that to staff.
As far as I'm aware, there's no fee to be in the inclusionary housing program.
I'm actually going to defer that discussion to staff.
So, Christine, so one of the things that we did was just looked at if someone didn't do inclusionary housing, if they elected to pay the fee instead, the impact of that. So we just stripped it out of the entire analysis.
Great, okay. Just want to make clear
So
about that.
I just want to make sure I'm not missing something in terms of your new methodology. So let's take the example of a 6-story apartment building. Is there a difference in the fee that you would calculate based on whether or not there was on-site parking?
So parking is not a final destination. So what we assess is the use, so the retail portion or the residential portion or the mixed use, but not parking itself. It's interesting.
I'm just trying to, and to help me understand that, so a 6-story apartment building built, say, under the Transit-Oriented Development Program that's across the street from the MAX, has an express bus, and the city's best trail. No parking, and it actually markets to people who say, here's a new way of living. You can get a small apartment, walk to work, take public transit. Up the street is the same building with twice the amount of parking that's required, with a lot of parking that goes free because they want people to be able to park their cars in. And it just happens, we know that 70% of people in apartment buildings own a car. So in effect, it has, that building is encouraging people to, make it as convenient as possible with their cars. I'm just curious, why wouldn't we treat the two differently?
So what we would assess is on the number of residential units. And the shift that we've made in this new methodology is to count the person trips they make regardless of mode. So if you get in your vehicle, that is one trip by one person. If you walk down the street, that's one trip by one person. So the mode is not what we are assessing now. It is the use and the number of PM peak hour person trips that are being made. There is an example, if we want to get into the details, of the Emory apartment.
I think I understand your methodology. I'm struggling with it a little bit.
Yeah.
I get it. And since we are talking about impact, help me understand, the person that leaves their apartment and walks down the sidewalk and they weigh about 100 pounds and they do that trip a lot and over a lifetime have no impact on the sidewalk, versus the person that parks their Hummer in their apartment building and drives a lot and over time does have an impact on the street. Is there a difference that we care about in terms of calculating STCs?
So the person that walks down the sidewalk needs that infrastructure as well. And so our capital projects that we want to build out to accommodate growth include projects to put in more protected bike lanes, to build sidewalk infrastructure, to accommodate transit systems and make our transit system more accessible and walkable. There are some road projects, but they mainly deal with freight capacity. So, and that is the essence of what we're trying to build, is for people to make trips on the system. The discounts that Kendra talked about in the centers and the central city are based on, I think, what you are really getting to, Commissioner Fish, the impact that a person makes on the system.
I'm sorry, I'm trying to-
The director is here.
Is different based on the mode that they take.
Yeah.
So,
And
If I could just add, I think it goes back to what the mayor pointed out right when we opened up, is we don't charge SDCs for adjacent capacity. We charge it for overall capacity in the city. That's what we're trying to
Yeah.
do.
And I'm going to be clear, my questions are designed to understand the approach and how you've chosen this approach. I'm absorbing it. I'm not ready to show my hand. One last question. We had a conversation a few weeks ago about so-called smart cities. Another term I hope we abolish and replace with something else. And the gist of it is, it's, it's an artful marketing ploy, in my opinion, for putting in the infrastructure for autonomous vehicles. And I think my own personal view is we've jumped through a lot of hoops without actually asking some threshold questions. That said, are we budgeting any SDC money under this program for any of the improvements that are required to support smart cities and the new grids?
yes, we are, because those smart city projects will definitely enhance capacity. One of the things that we are using the current SDC program for is to look at putting in sensors to do some of the pedestrian counts out on 122nd Avenue and Hawthorne and I think Division corridors. So yeah, the essence of, intelligent transportation system, the ITS projects that our traffic signals folks have started maybe 25 years ago, those are smart city projects. Again, it's rebranded into something new, but those are really capacity enhancing for the system.
Well, let me just be clear, because the council made a very emphatic statement that we weren't going to spend public money ahead of deciding what we were going to do with respect to smart cities. From what you just said, I draw a sharp distinction between investments in things that advance Vision Zero, advancements in things that do safety, and the line that I think we have to be more mindful of is what appears to be building out a grid for a system that we have not yet determined whether we're going to, support or invest in. And you used 122nd as an example, and I'm glad you did, because frankly, my fear on Smart City, one component of it is that we are going to sort of willy-nilly authorize investments in the central part of our town on the theory that this is where autonomous vehicles are more likely to be used, and it's going to work against our equity goals of frankly making the common sense safety improvements in the rest of the city they've been crying for, legitimately demanding. And so, Mayor, we had this conversation at council, and we had actually a understanding that we would first do the assessment and the study and then come back and talk about it. So it would be my expectation that we're not using SDCs in this plan to drive smart cities until the council has authorized a smart city policy, unless I'm misstating council policies.
Thank you for that feedback, Commissioner, and we look forward to the future conversations about that. It's really helpful guidance and feedback for us. To your earlier question, Commissioner Fish, about a comparison of current charge and the proposed charge, we will submit that in follow-up information to you and the rest of the council so you can have an idea on a case-by-case basis what kind of changes we're looking at.
Good, thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. So if I can wrap up, over the next few months, we're going to complete the last few elements relative to the update. That would be the administrative rules, updating the overlay areas to align with the new program. And we really are hopeful today that the council is going to direct us to complete these steps to have a full program ready to commence on January 1st, 2018. I also would like to point out the letters of support that are included in your packet. It includes support from the Portland Planning and Sustainability Commission, the Transportation Justice Alliance with leadership organizations including the Amalgamated Transit Union Local 757, Apano Community Cycling Center, Opal Environmental Justice Oregon, and NEA. Portland Streetcar, the Development Review Advisory Committee, Go Lloyd, coalitions and neighborhood associations, including Sullivan's Gulch and Northeast Coalition of Neighborhoods, the Street Trust, the Portland Pedestrian Advisory Committee, the Portland Freight Committee, the Portland Bicycle Advisory Committee, the Portland Commission on Disability, and Union Pacific Railroad. And so with that, I would like to call up our invited testimony. We have Laura Becker, Pia Welch, Elliot Aquai Scott, and Mary Helen Kincaid. And when they are finished, we'll still be here and available for questions that you may have of us. Thank you.
Thank you, very good. Do we have any public testimony?
They're doing
Oh, I'm sorry,
invited.
I apologize. I apologize. We love invited testimony. Come on up. Commissioner Saltzman, did you want to make the introductions or just let them introduce themselves?
They can introduce themselves.
Very good.
Carla, we love the graphic. 1851. But you knew that.
Do you want to go ahead and start us off? Thank you.
Sure. I'm Mary Helen Kincaid. I'm the chair of the Development Review Advisory Committee and am here speaking on behalf of DRAC. A lot's been said. I want to commend the PBOT staff that came to several DRAC meetings and went over a lot of the statistics, responded to many questions. In fact, some of those slides, I think, were a result of DRAC asking for the overview of impacts of fees. I also want to point out that this was historically, for those people that have been around DRAC for a long time, this was a wonderful collaborative effort on behalf of the members of DRAC. It wasn't a we versus they. It was informed people in a room coming to a collaborative recognition of the needs of the city and transportation infrastructure. Not to say there wasn't lively discussion, but they did come to support this proposal as you saw today. In recognition of that, the overarching message that DRAC wanted me to bring was we need to look at SDC fees in a holistic way. We need to see how those fees and regulations combined affect development, and not in a every 3 months, sometimes every 2 years. I don't know who can convene that. I think you've heard me say before, I'm not a big fan of silo government, but all the different infrastructure bureaus are under different commissioners, different directors, but I think there needs to be some sort of...
We got 3 under 2,
Okay,
so that's progress.
We'll pick on Commissioner Saltzman because he's... But I think someone needs to convene so that we look at all fees and regulations as they, so that they aren't popping up every 7 months, maybe every 2 years, what that impact is. And in a letter that DRAC sent in May, and then again in our July letter to council, that was one of the first things we mentioned. Look at the overall overarching impacts that development fees and charges have on development, because quite frankly, and just recently, I don't know why it didn't come to my awareness, but in watching like the Home for Everyone work session video and all those kinds of, I don't know how you keep track of all the fees and the overall impact. So I would think it would be informative to council members as well as the public, what's this really costing us? Not that Home for Everyone has any impact on development, but the water charges, the sewer charges. Do you remember what the BES fees were increased? I mean, those kinds of things I think would be informative, and they would also help bring the development community more in line with neighborhoods and people that are being impacted by those fees. So DRAC, I think, on the basis of yet a third plea to have some sort of commission, if it's a Gator study, if it's whatever, of how all the fees that the city charges impacts development. Because the bottom line in everybody's mind, every time you add $1 to a development, it adds $1 to the cost of that housing. And that's just plain and common sense. I mean, that's just business.
Mary Helen, can I just ask you something? Sure. Is there any reason why at the beginning of our budget process, when we start our hearings, that we couldn't ask the Independent Budget Office to just prepare a one-pager showing, as you say, holistically, all the proposed increases of SDCs, because they're all baked into all the budgets, and they're all part of the thing, and do that as a single document so the public would have that and we could look at it holistically?
Sure, give me a magic wand and I'll wave it and so be it.
Well, I think the mayor's
I
probably,
think
my guess
that would
is the
be a
mayor's
perfect
persuaded that's a good
informative-
idea.
Yeah, I think it would be a perfect informative tool to use in how we plan, because we talk about affordable housing, low-cost housing, all those things, yet you don't, talking with PCRI and Proud Ground and Home Forward, as they have all different kinds of fees that are waived, that they have to pay, those kinds of things. People want to immediately go to permit fees. Well, that's only like 7% of the cost. All the rest is in other places. And 6 years on DRAC, I still don't have it down pat. But I think that's an excellent idea, because I don't believe that they're making outlandish claims to what needs to be paid for, but I think you need a overarching look at what those processes are. And like Commissioner Fish pointed out, do you spend money on autonomous vehicles? Do you spend money on sidewalks? Do you spend money on pedestrian ways? I live in a neighborhood that doesn't have sidewalks. We don't have a bus. I mean, and it's fine, but you wouldn't, how do you evaluate what program's going to get the most bang for the buck? And I think that DRAC is adamant about trying to get that overarching look. It will help the development community and it'll help the city. I think because you got the letters, I'm not going to go over it, but I just wanted to point out that I thought it was remarkable that DRAC came together and supported a fee increase. I don't know how often you see that. And it points to the fact that they want to do better and they want to see an overall approach to all fees and regulations. We do have a subcommittee that's been meeting, but it's been kind of, Mayor Wheeler had the group that looked at that, and I think that could be the continuum. It could be a phase 2 of that group and include DRAC in that conversation.
Agreed. I think that's a good template, and it's reminiscent of the work that Commissioner Udaley and I did on the permitting. We did do a Gator session where we brought together different bureaus, and that's where we reached that conclusion that it's really only 6% of the total development cost. I'm not saying that 6% isn't important, but it's not the economic driver. And we'd heard a narrative that it was the economic driver. And so if nothing else, we came out of the Gator session realizing, okay, there's areas in terms of process and accountability where we can strengthen our cross-bureau collaboration. But we also realized that the prevailing narrative was in fact a false narrative. And now we have the facts to back it. So I agree with you and Commissioner Fish's notion that when we come into the budget process, it would be helpful to have all of this information on one page, much in the way that the Transportation Bureau put it all on one page for this particular presentation. So I agree with that.
Good.
Commissioner
I'll report
Udaley?
back to the DRAC next week. They'll like that.
And is DRAC referring to the percentage of cost relative to the overall budget of a given project, or the potential, I guess, disincentive to build it all?
I think it's to the cost.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a disincentive approach. I'm going to speak outside of my DRAC hat now. I don't think that price increase will be a disincentive. I think they'll build. It'll just be more expensive at probably the cost of more affordable homes.
Okay, thanks.
Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Pia Welch. I'm the chair of the Portland Freight Committee and also a PBAC member. The Portland Freight Committee had put together a work group, and we primarily concentrated on the project list. And we were very pleased. We reviewed the Transportation System Plan project list and the newly adopted Regional Overdimensional Truck Study project list that came out of that study. And we would like to acknowledge and thank the PBOT staff for the inclusion of our recommendations, which includes the Columbia Boulevard Georgia Middle School pedestrian overpass replacement, the Columbia Boulevard Railroad undercrossing improvement, and then North Portland Columbia Slough Bridge replacement. In reviewing the project list, we believe that the project list is a little more robust and balanced allocation of funding between all the modes. So again, we would like to thank everyone for their work on this project.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning, Mayor Wheeler, Commissioner Saltzman, and members of council. My name is Elliot Aquai-Scott. I'm the Vice Chair of the Portland Bicycle Advisory Committee. The Bicycle Advisory Committee is a modal committee appointed by council and charged with advising the city on all matters relating to bicycling. The BAC had an opportunity to review the proposed TSDC changes in May this year with the presentation by PBOT staff. I'm here today to speak on behalf of the BAC in support of the TSDC update, including the updated methodology, the project list, and the rate schedule. The proposed new TSDC methodology for assessing charges to new development on a per-person trip rather than per-vehicle trip basis reflects Portland's multimodal transportation network and growing use of active transportation. The BAC supports a multimodal approach to transportation policy that includes bicycle trips and acknowledges the contribution that bicycling makes to the city's transportation infrastructure. The BAC also endorses the TSDC project list, which was developed through a robust process, drawing from the city's previous transportation planning efforts, public outreach, and strong considerations for equity and safety. TSDC list projects provide new transportation capacity that supports demand generated by new development. Since 2000, more new commute trips in the city have been supported by bicycling than by any other mode of transportation based on U.S. Census data. The BAC finds that the updated Transportation Systems Development Charge Program aligns with the city's comprehensive plan and transportation system plan goals of prioritizing a multimodal transportation system. And finally, the BAC supports the adjustment of TSDC rates from 40% to 50% of the eligible list to better align with rates assessed by other jurisdictions in the Portland metro region, generating approximately $300 million over the next 10 years to help the city build out a multimodal infrastructure, especially in areas like East Portland, where existing infrastructure is struggling to support increased demand and where increasing user safety continues to be a pressing concern. I'd just like to add, as a personal reflection, I think the process for developing the TSDC project list and the considerations that the PBOT staff and consultants showed to equity and safety and considerations building the list were some of the strongest of any city project that I've seen. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you all. I'm Laura Becker, outgoing co-chair of PBOT's Budget and Bureau Advisory Committee. It's been an honor, and I appreciate the opportunity to represent this thoughtful and diverse group of volunteers who help PBOT better understand the people they serve and their concerns. During the committee's most recent term, we did discuss a variety of topics related to the TSDC program and update, including the shift to a person trip methodology, the proposed project list, and increased rates. This update will secure a fair share from developers for transportation improvements needed to accommodate Portland's growth over the next 10 years. We support the 169 projects recommended for funding. The project team presented evaluation criteria to ensure general geographic proportionality, meet the city's multimodal transportation goals, and continue to provide and improve access to jobs, housing, and daily needs in underserved communities. The TSDC update project list draws from the adopted TSP and other recently adopted plans, including Vision Zero, as well as plans that are in the process of adoption. The increased eligibility of more projects results in a more forward-looking project list that moves the dial on equity across the city. The current TSDC rates simply do not and will not generate enough revenue, and it is our neighbors who are already under pressure that are burdened from the delay of needed projects. We hope the council will approve the proposed rate, which will raise up to $229 million or $300 million towards completing capacity and growth-oriented transit projects where they are and will be needed over the next 10 years. Thank you for considering our committee's recommendations.
Thank you.
Thank you. That completes the invited testimony.
Very good. Carla, is there a public testimony?
Yes, I have about 8 people left here.
Very good. 3 minutes each. When Carla calls your name, please state your name for the record.
The first 3 are Jason Franklin, Terry Dublinsky Milton, and Amy Wren.
Terry, would you like to go first, please?
Sure.
Thank you, sir.
I am Terry Dublinsky Milton, and most of my comments will be speaking on behalf of Southeast Uplift, where I'm co-chair. I would like to thank everybody who's spoken so far. Southeast Uplift did not have time with PBOT's request to comment on this whole thing, as we usually take a couple of months to debate. But I can speak on certain things that we have voted on. Southeast Uplift, we have consistently voted in favor of multimodal projects, and so using the new methodology is in line with all our previous votes. It seems to make sense. I would personally defer to PBOT's recommendations when it comes to the transportation impact fees. As we all know, we need more money for transportation. Now, similarly, we didn't take a stand on the entire project list, but through a community-driven process I call Southeast Uplift in Motion, we have endorsed multiple projects in the past that can be looked at as Priority 1 projects that have been funded, and then a next tier which we request get funded next. I would like to highlight 2 of them which have had board approval. The Reedway Overpass, which you will see on your map, is a red line over by the railroad tracks by McLaughlin, fills a 1.7-mile gap between the Bybee bike lanes and the double elevator Lafayette Overpass.
Terry, could you sit back from the mic a little, because it's
Okay.
popping? Yeah,
Thank you.
Thanks.
And it's endorsed as the highest priority for Smile, Reed, Eastmoreland, and Brooklyn. The Southeast Uplift endorsed allocation of transportation impact fees, I'm going to use that term, for design and outreach, not build, because we know this is going to be expensive. And we want to see a ramped option so we know the costs. Since this is connecting Westmoreland to Reed College, we all know what's going to happen in the middle of the night with the college students if there's elevators. And not only that, the Lafayette Overpass was down for 3 months last winter because of water damage, and then it was also closed during the heat because of the greenhouse effect. It was too hot to go in the elevators. And so if we want a good connection, it needs to be ramped. And for the next minute or so, I'd like to talk about the 60s Bikeway. This has the long route, which has been circled. It has been endorsed as the highest priority of all 6 neighborhoods along the route: North Mount, South Tabor, or Mount Scott Arletta, Brentwood Darlington, and Foster Powell. You can look at it as 3 parts. The northern section from Davis to the 60th Max Station in Halsey was just endorsed unanimously, which I testified for last week on the Growing Transit Communities project. This is one of the highest densities of R1 we have in Southeast Uplift, and the R1 zoning would be facilitated by this project. South of Division is a Safe Routes to Schools project for all the southern neighborhoods to access Mount Tabor Park, the new south entrance, and the Harrison Lincoln Greenway, which is getting a safety modernization as part of the gas tax. Then the middle section connecting Lincoln to Davis will assess Stark, Burnside, and access to Mount Tabor Park for areas that don't currently have access. A couple more seconds. And Burnside right now is the highest largest pro tem parking left on the east side, which has those 3 lanes that appear and disappear depending on the commute times. And this project will do an engineering assessment of that. Plus, one personal plug, Amy has a good project that I think should be added. Thank you.
Well done. Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning, Mayor and Commissioners. Jason Franklin, Director of Campus Planning and Design, Portland State University. Thanks for listening to our testimony. Portland State University has submitted a letter, which I believe you all have, a kind of fact sheet going over kind of our analysis of the new rate study and rate sheet. And first I want to say thanks to Commissioner Saltzman for the amendment to the rate study. So we're speaking in favor of that this morning. We know how hard it is for staff to come up with a defensible rate study, and we certainly appreciate the need for TSDCs. We're supportive of it. We're supportive of the amendments and of the changes to the rate study. However, the rate study as previously published actually more than tripled the rates on university buildings, and so we think this was just simply a kind of wasn't enough time for staff to go through and do the analysis on all the different types of buildings and uses in the project. And so we've been talking to staff about that for the last couple of months, and we're happy that they've come forward with amendment, which we fully support. and we think provides a modest increase to the university, which is more in line with all the other increases that you see in the TSDC rate list. So we support the amendment, and again, thanks for all the hard work of staff and working with us, and Commissioner Salzman for supporting the amendment. So thank you.
Very good. Thank you for your testimony. Good morning.
Hi, thank you. My name is Amy Wren, and I'm here to request an addition to the list of projects. So it's already pretty big. I'm here to request another one. So the project that I am proposing is on Southeast Mill between Southeast 80th and Southeast 82nd. So it's a 2-block stretch of road. You all have photos of the stretch of road. It is the Safe Routes to School for Bridger K through 8 school. It currently is, it does not have sidewalks, and it currently floods anytime there's rain. It is also the neighborhood greenway that continues past Lincoln. So once you pass Tabor, it is the greenway to East Portland. It is very important that this project gets put on this list at this time because this stretch of road, Southeast Mill, is being planned to have the sewer replaced down the middle of the road. So this road in the next couple of years will be completely torn up and the sewer line will be replaced. There's no plans currently to change the street, so no plans to add drainage, no plans to add sidewalks at this time. So the TSD, the funds, if they were added on, could kind of connect these two projects. The goal also is to get funding from Safe Routes to School. They have acknowledged that this stretch is an issue, as you can see from the photos. And additionally, the neighbors who live on this street are currently working towards possibly creating a LID. So the people who live on the street are at this time are discussing, like, we might be willing to put money into this fund to help pay for it. However, without the funding from the TSD fees, it's just not affordable for the people on the street to do it. So I'm here to ask that we add this to the list. I currently don't live on the street. I also currently don't have children that go to this school, but I do use the neighborhood greenway. And the reason I got involved with this is because every single day I see kids struggling through that street, through that stretch of street. There's a lot of kids who get off TriMet on 82nd. They take the 72nd bus. They get off at 82nd. They cross 82nd because that's one of the only places where there's a street light currently to get to Bridger. So they cross 82nd and they are met with that road. You have photos. I think they speak for themselves. So I'm just here to ask that we add this project to the list.
Thank you, Amy. Commissioner Fritz?
Thank you for your testimony, and thank you for the photographs. They really do tell a thousand words. Thank you for your altruism, too. I mean, I'm sure the improvements for you as somebody passing through are less than those of people actually going there. So we'll ask staff at the end whether we could do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Very good. Next three, please, Carla.
Are Jim Brown, Eli Spivak, and Alan Kessler.
And then there were two more after that, Carla, is that correct? Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, members of the council, my name is Jim Brown. I'm an attorney representing Western Container Corporation and Trico Real Estate LLC in support of the city's proposed amendments to the TSDC code to adopt the 2017 rate study, to establish an updated rate schedule and amend the code. We respectfully remind the council that in its recent August 30th meeting, they adopted the North Sutter Road LID. And PBOT on August 20, in the 23rd meeting, recommended a $500,000 contribution from the TSDC funds towards the North Sutter Road LID development. We therefore request that the council include the North Sutter Road LID on the list of projects eligible for the TSDC funding, and that they provide the recommended PBOT contribution. I've also attached to my written comments letters of support from Supreme Pearlite Company and Oil Re-Refining Company, who are also property owners in the North Sutter Road LID district. We appreciate the city's contribution towards the North Solar Road LID, which places heavy burdens on the local 9 property owners that will be funding that. And so we thank you for your efforts to provide additional city funding and for the city staff's help in the development of the LID.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Sir. We appreciate your testimony. Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Eli Spivak, and I actually came prepared to speak on behalf of the Planning Commission, on which I serve, but I'm happy to speak in personally. I'm very overlapped with them. As noted by presentation previously, the Planning Commission offered a letter of support for this program, which I agree with. The letter also had a couple caveats and suggestions, and one of them, I'll paraphrase or read from the letter, was that the Planning Commission fully supports PBOT's decision to focus on person trips rather than VMT, and recommends that the fee structure for homes and apartments have several tiers using data relating home size to average household size. This would more accurately scale residential SDCs to demands on our transportation system by the number of residents living in them, since people use our transportation system, not homes, and would be closer to the way retail and office SDCs are handled. We urge PBOT to refine the methodology this round. So that was from the Planning Commission letter. So I've dug into this a little bit deeper and would like to share with the council that for, as they outlined, residential subset of their fees, for apartments or attached housing, they're proposing a lump sum flat fee across all types. So there would be the same transportation impact fee, whether it's a 300 square foot apartment or a 3-story penthouse suite apartment or a 3-story townhome. Those could be 3,000 square feet or larger. We know from data that Parks has reviewed, and it's easily available at your fingertips with the American Housing Survey, that on average, smaller homes, like a 400 square foot apartment, have fewer people living in them than larger homes. And it's not a direct line correlation, but there's clearly a great statistic database showing a correlation between household size and number of people. Unfortunately, the consultants they've hired have not brought that into the equation, and there may be some discrepancy between the type of data they traditionally use and that information. But if you imagine a situation where a small grocery store, imagine the groceries are charged just based on a lump sum for every grocery store, you think that the small grocers would be pretty upset. And that's kind of what's happening here.
Eli, can I just ask you a question?
Sure.
It won't go against your time. I'm having a flashback to, I think, Mark Evelyn coming before us a few years ago, and he was talking about what he thought was the inequity of charging SDCs based on the door. And I think the precise argument was, we want to create an incentive for those smaller units that are more efficient, and why should we charge the same for, as you say, the 300 square foot versus the 1,500 foot penthouse? And that was a very live discussion in the past. And so, and just so I'm clear, and I'm reading your testimony, the proposal that's before us now would take us back to just treating the doors the same regardless of the square footage?
I think actually that's the status quo with transportation right now, is that it's per door rather than square footage.
Maybe it was Parks that we...
Parks has addressed this issue, and in some ways Water has addressed it also, because homes either have a 5/8, 3/4, or 1-inch meter.
So in Parks, we did make some adjustment.
Correct. Just got a very helpful letter from Cully Neighbourhood Association of Neighbours that actually shows the parks in comparison with the transportation. It's in the packet we just got handed.
Because my understanding is, when we did the Parks, there was you brought an amendment which actually lowered the charge for the micro units.
Yeah, we had 5 different categories where PBOT is only proposing.
Is this the flavor of what you're getting at, Eli?
This is the flavor, yes. And I propose 4 categories in the middle. I think that I'd be happy with anything, but the idea is that there should be some logical relationship, and consumers of small homes should not be subsidizing those of large homes to on average have more people in them. So there's an equity standpoint, and also a policy perspective is that price is a driver. If you're paying the same system development charge, whether you're building a 500 square foot unit or a 5,000 square foot unit, then that gives you yet another incentive to build larger homes, larger apartments, and that runs counter to some policy objectives the city of Portland has. So my hope is that whether the data gets resolved or not, that council can submit an amendment to just spread out the fee. and avoid the issue that Fritz raised earlier, Commissioner Fritz, about the $1,200 sort of threshold. If you do an addition from 1,100 square feet and add a 100 square foot bump out, you're going to double your SDC from doing that under this current proposal. Spreading it out helps address that question.
Very good, thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Alan Kessler. I'm here, at least for the first bit, for the Portland Bus Lane project. We sent you a letter. It lists 10 specific projects that we would like you to take a look at, we would like you to prioritize funding on. Specifically, when you prioritize funding on those projects, we would like you to please make sure that PBOT is directed that those funds must include transit priority. All of those spots we found in particular, we believe will particularly benefit specific bus lines. We've listed those out. We've bolded the bus lines that have been called out by the GTC and ETC in the letter. I didn't hand you a copy of the letter right now if you're all looking for it. There's some confused looks. I'm sorry. I emailed it. I'll send another round, but it's in testimony. But anyway, if you'll look at our letter, there's a list of 10 projects that are enumerated. They show you in the first column the project number, the name, and then they'll show you which bus lines those will benefit. And we think that it would be a shame to spend those funds without benefiting a bus service, but these are great opportunities where we can spend the funds and increase transit, increase the priority of transit. So these comments the next comments are my own. I wanted to repeat something that was said by staff while one of the commissioners had stepped out, which is that buses are 95% more efficient than single occupancy vehicles at moving people through our neighborhoods. PBOT has told you that they want to start counting people trips, not car trips. The logical conclusion of that is we should not add a single bit of additional auto capacity. More importantly, when we're doing revisions to our street, when we're restriping, when we're doing any sort of improvements to our streets, we should be looking for opportunities to take unnecessary vehicle capacity away and reallocate it to the more efficient modes. Specifically to transit because that's the most efficient mode. I asked the clerk to distribute a copy of a recent plan. Okay, so this is the restriping on Main, or these are the improvements that are planned for Main. These just came out today. PBOT gave me a donut the other day on Betternado. They came out, they tabled, they stopped and talked to people who were riding by. So I stood and I talked to one of the project managers from PBOT on Betternado for a while about this specific project. This was actually a couple of months ago. When we talked about it, one of the things that came up is that the bus lane is, you'll see it's on the right side of the paper, it's on the east side of the intersection. It used to be on the west side of the intersection. That's more efficient because the bus doesn't get stuck between these right-turning vehicles, between people who are trying to cross the street when the light turns green. So if you were ever to stand and watch buses at that intersection, they take a long time to make that turn. And you'll see 3 or 4 backed up at times. This is an example of an opportunity missed. The dark shading in here is where we're going to be adding concrete, so it's a permanent solution. But had we moved the bus stop across the street here, we could have increased transit priority. Additionally, had we chosen to eliminate right turns here, we could have increased transit priority. The reason the gentleman told me that we're not eliminating right turns is because there's a lot of demand for right turns. Well, I point out the irony. We were standing on Betternado, which used to be a freeway. What was the demand for car travel on Betternado on the waterfront park during that time? It was 0 because we'd eliminated it. People found other ways. We need to tell PBOT with every single project, increase person capacity, don't increase vehicle capacity.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Thank you, all 3 of you. Next 2, please.
Are Paul, I believe the last name is Grove, and Laura Young.
Paul, why don't you start, please?
Thank you. Mayor Wheeler, Commissioners, for the record, my name is Paul Grove with the Portland Metro HBA. Appreciate the opportunity to testify today. I submitted a letter. It may have been a little late for your package, so there should be something forthcoming if you don't already have it. I'll try not to repeat what I said in the letter. But I wanted to speak in support of the proposal today. As an association, we've long recognized the importance of SDCs in addressing the impacts to the system around new development. And this proposal is in keeping with that. One of the things that struck us as an association was, in this lengthy process, the degree of outreach and input that PBOT sought from all stakeholders. I think it was a very robust discussion that was had, whether it was industry development, DRAC, Planning and Sustainability Commission, and other community and neighborhood groups. And I think it really served as a model in terms of the type of feedback and input for folks to have their concerns raised, addressed, and then ultimately or potentially realized in the proposal. So I think kudos to PBOT and PBOT staff in that throughout the process. As I noted, the association is supportive of this, and I think as Mary Helen noted in DRAC, it's not often that we come forward in support of certain proposals. And so I think, in my testimony, I listed a series of points, and they range from geographic equity to the balancing out affordability concerns in terms of using 50% of the maximum defensible rate. But one of the things I wanted to really touch upon was the accountability aspect, and I think that the process that PBOT undertook and having that move forward will ensure a degree of accountability with this program that we're encouraged by moving forward. I think whether it's refinements to the program, whether we're looking at improvements, I think it's something that can set the standard for the proposals that they have, and if we want to see potential changes moving forward, and I know folks want to examine certain items, that we can, again, bring that diverse group of citizens and stakeholders together to hash out those policy objectives and move forward on that. So I'll be mindful of folks' time. Again, I have written remarks, and thank you for the opportunity.
Mayor, can I just pose a question?
Commissioner Fish.
Paul, you represent the industry that builds things, so I'm curious of your perspective on a question that came up in the prior panel. So the city has all these policies that are trying to encourage smaller, greener footprint. We're going to get denser, so we got to go smaller and greener. What do you say to the critics of a system that treats SDCs the same for a 300 square foot very efficient unit and a 2,000 square foot penthouse?
Well, I think, Commissioner Fish, members of council, I think, I am cognizant, and I've had a lot of discussions with my friends from Cully about this issue. And I think at least where the proposal stands right now, there's a degree of comfort for our members in terms of we have a carve out for 1,200 square feet or less, in particular around ADUs. Cottage-style development is one of the things that we discussed amongst our Portland members. I would defer to PBOT in the sense of, we're looking at the trips, we're looking at the impacts to the system, and I think their testimony noted that more data was needed, and I think we would subscribe to that.
Okay, thank you.
Very good. Good morning.
All right. Good morning. Thank you. My name is Laura Young. I'm the chair of the Coley Association of Neighbors, and I have some letter of recommendation and comments. I had attached an example to the back of the letter. It's not actually part of the letter, just so you know. Dear Mayor and Commissioners, the Coley Association of Neighbors would like to offer comments on the Transportation System Development Plan charge update. As background, the Coley neighborhood was annexed into the city in 1985. Consequently, we share, similar with East Portland, a lack of adequate transportation infrastructure, such as sidewalks, safe bike routes, paved streets, and connectivity. We are therefore pleased that a number of projects important to our neighborhood are proposed to be eligible for the Transportation System Development Charge funding. At the same time, we are aware that the transportation improvements, while needed and desirable, make our neighborhood more attractive to developers, investors, and home buyers, driving up prices and exacerbating displacement that we're already experiencing. Due to these pressures, we adopted an inclusive Coley policy as a community, which proposes a variety of strategies, including encouraging moderately priced individual home ownership, as a wealth-building, prosperity-enhancing strategy, encouraging renters to become homeowners, to build wealth, and to stabilize families, and encouraging alternative designs for infill, such as accessory dwelling units, small house cottage clusters, and other strategies to promote more affordable market-rate infill housing. All these strategies could be served by a slightly amended rate schedule for TSDCs. The proposed rate schedule offers 3 rates for residential development: single-family less than 1,200 square feet, and multifamily. The rate for the small house is half the rate for a larger house and a bit more than the rate for an apartment. We appreciate the proposal seems to acknowledge the need to incentivize smaller housing units. As it stands, however, the proposal does not accomplish that. At most, the only housing that will be built smaller than 1,200 square feet is an accessory dwelling unit, an ADU, so there is no incentive to build smaller market rate housing. Meanwhile, the apartment rate means that a 4,000 square foot penthouse or a luxury 3-story townhouse will actually pay a little less than an ADU. And on the back side of your letter, there's an example of the proposed residential transportation rates, and then the parks rate system as well as we're using as an example as a better model. The rate schedule for parks SDCs adopted in 2014 offers a good example. It lists 5 residential rates for different size units regardless of whether they are single or multifamily. This rate structure creates a clear incentive for developers to build smaller and therefore more affordable housing. We understand and support the new methodology using person trips to calculate TSDC rates. The Parks Bureau used the data from 2011 showing large dwelling units having more people in them on average. Now 2015 data is also available through the American Community Survey. It is intuitively obvious that more people results in more trips. I'm going to stop there. I have 3 seconds. I just want to comment. Can I have 30 more seconds? When we talk about the transportation system development charges and how they apply to CULI, it really is an equity issue. We have single mother households, 297% of the city average, African American, 239% of the city average, Latino, 236% of the city average, family households in poverty, 236% of the city average. And we also have a higher than average rate of homeownership, which means we have a large number of low-income homeowners. And having these projects such as the 47th Avenue LID, the 57th and Killingsworth LID that's proposed by the Habitat Project, and the 75th and Roselawn that didn't make the list that I would like to take a plug for you to take another look at. All these projects create opportunities for small infill projects to reduce the burden on individual homeowners and to get some of this infrastructure improvement completed in a way that doesn't unreasonably burden our community.
Very good, thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Lightning. I represent Lightning Super Watchdog X. In my opinion, if you want more homes to be built, we don't keep tacking on more fees to the developers. I would like to see the fees held at a certain capped at a certain rate and held for at least the next 3 years. I think market conditions right now, especially on developing more multifamily, it's beginning to cool off, and we need to offer something to the developers to keep the current pace moving forward. Every time you tack on more fees, it's going to kick up the prices of housing. Every time you tack on more fees, it's going to kick up the rents for the tenants. Why not cap it, carry it out for 3 years, don't add more on the developers. They've done a great job in the last few years. Let them continue that pace and understand we still need more units, we still need more homes developed. And the thing about it, the reality is that when you look at certain studies, we might have a surplus of smaller units as far as multifamily. We need larger units built right now. We need to have more developed for family-sized units. And, you know, the numbers make more sense to build the smaller units in these developments. We need to make more sense to build larger family-sized units, to develop more homes. We are restricting the developers moving forward. We are adding more fees to them when they've done an outstanding job in the last 3 years. They have added a tremendous amount of inventory. Don't penalize them for that. Continue the movement to go forward. Continue supporting the development community, and understand, look at the market conditions right now. It's beginning to cool off. We need to understand, to keep them developing more properties, quit adding more fees to these developers. And in my opinion, we've got to stop doing that, plain and simple. We have to stop penalizing the current developers out in the marketplace. Don't add more on the fees, put a cap on it, and I don't approve what's going to be passed today. And you're all going to pass it, of course, because it's more fees to the city. I absolutely disagree with this.
Lightning, this proposal actually reduces fees.
It actually does not. When you look at the charts from Beaverton.
It does on some.
Yeah, okay, since you brought that up, I will go back against you. If you look at Beaverton opposed to Portland, and then you look at the increases on a single-family home, it actually went up. So for you to say it's actually going down is incorrect. That's an actual incorrect statement. Okay? That is incorrect. So my point being, if you want to keep adding more fees to the developers, it's going to stop them from wanting to develop more properties. We're already seeing that right now. And if you add more fees, it's going to increase the rents. It's not going to make housing affordable. And why do you add more fees if you want more development at this time when we have a housing shortage, when we have a shortage for housing currently out there? Why do you keep adding more fees? It doesn't make sense. Do you really have to at this time? That's my question. Do you really have to when the market is cooling off? So that's my position. Thank you. Don't add more fees to the developers. They've done a great job. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thanks, all three of you, for your testimony. We appreciate it. So Commissioner Saltzman has an amendment on the table that was seconded by Commissioner Fritz. Is there any further discussion on that amendment? We're going to move this to second, but we can take the vote on the amendment, move that as well.
What I'd like to reserve, I have questions which I'd like to ask PBOT
Sure.
before the second reading. I
You
may
bet.
have some more amendments after that.
Very good. Come on up.
No, I don't want to ask it now.
Oh, not
It's coming back in 2 weeks.
Yeah, it's coming back in
Yeah,
2
very,
weeks.
very, very
That-
good.
I will certainly be in touch, responding to some of the testimony that we heard. I'm sure you do have comments on that.
So we could pass the amendment to second reading,
Yes.
leaving that open if that would be your preference.
Yes, please.
Very good, and Commissioner Saltzman's good with that, so the proposer and the seconder. So with that, this is a first reading of a non-emergency ordinance.
We could vote
Mayor, we're gonna vote on it?
Just said we're going to vote on the amendment.
Could
Oh,
we,
you want to vote on the
Let's
amendment?
vote on the amendment, Mayor.
Very good. Call the roll.
Thank you.
could we just hear the amendment since it's been a while?
So the, here it is, Dan, if you want to reread it.
Oh, okay.
Or just a brief description?
Well, it's for colleges and universities.
Oh, great. Okay.
It replaces square foot calculation with a student calculation.
Great.
Okay.
Thanks.
Very good. Please call the roll.
Saltzman,
Aye.
Udaley,
Aye.
Fritz.
Thank you, everybody, for your testimony, and thanks for all the staff work. I think we're getting towards a really good conclusion. Aye.
Fish,
Aye.
Wheeler.
Aye, the amendment is adopted. This is
Mayor?
Commissioner Fish.
So it's going to come back in 2 weeks. And like Commissioner Fritz, I thought it was a superb presentation, but there's some follow-up questions I'll have. And what we'll do is we'll start with emails just outlining the questions and then follow up with any briefings that are necessary. But there's a couple areas around smart cities and around this issue of whether we ought to have a further schedule depending on the square footage behind the door. And I'm just interested in learning more about that. But thank you very much.
So just a couple quick things based on the testimony. So I think on the autonomous vehicles, we don't have anything explicitly in our project list that is related to AV construction. So that's one thing we will provide more input in writing. Amy's testimony talked about one of the projects that you just voted on with consent today, which is adding her requests to the 70s bikeway. So that is already fully incorporated in our SDC project list. So thank you, Amy.
That was, I think, 2 weeks ago on the consent agenda. I believe.
Or I think we voted today.
Which one was that?
There was a 70s bikeway.
Okay.
And then Jim's request about the North Subtle Road, that is a project on our SDC list, so that is good. And then on the transit priority request, we can certainly put forward an amendment that I think would address their concerns if you want to do that. But I think inherently in our projects, we prioritize transit. So it's a question as to whether or not you want to do another amendment or if you just want us to make sure that we include those in those 10 projects that they asked about. And then we will provide in writing some more analysis about the single-family home. Okay.
Well, that's incredibly responsive. Thank you.
Yeah, that addresses two of my specific concerns raised in testimony. The other is about why you chose two categories of such single-family rather than five. Look forward to that. Thank you.
Very good. Colleagues, anything else? Good. This is a non-emergency first reading of an ordinance. It moves to second reading as amended is to September 27th. Very good. Next item, please.
Item 1007, appeal of Erica Cedar, DLR Group, and appeal of Peter Meijer Architect PC against the Historic Landmarks Commission's decision of approval with conditions for historic resource review of exterior alterations and rehabilitation of the Portland Building in the Central City at 1120 Southwest 5th Avenue, LU 1715, 3413 HRM AD.
Colleagues, just as a reminder, this is an issue where we've already taken extensive testimony. We've already taken a provisional vote. I would move that the council grant the appeal of Appellant 1, Erica Cedar, deny the appeal of Appellant 2, Peter Meijer, uphold the decision of the Landmarks Commission, but remove Condition G and adopt the findings. Is there a second?
Second.
Second?
Mayor?
Commissioner Fish.
I was absent for the hearing, and I have not had an opportunity to review the complete record, so I will not be participating in the vote.
Thank you, Commissioner Fish. Colleagues, anything else? Please call the roll.
Saltzman,
Aye.
Udaly,
Aye.
Fritz,
Aye.
Wheeler.
Aye, the motion is upheld. Thank you. Next item, please.
Item 1012, authorize a contract with CenturyLink Communications LLC for public safety telecommunications related equipment, services, and maintenance for a 5-year contractual total not to exceed $10 million.
Colleagues, to provide efficient 911 service to the residents of Portland, we must maintain and upgrade equipment systems to stay up to date with current technology. This extends to the master contract to purchase and maintain the appropriate equipment. It also provides funding for upgrades and replacement of the current 911 system. A full upgrade to the 911 system is scheduled for November 7th, 2017, which is funded out of the state of Oregon OEM 911 funds. The upgrade brings the technology level to current industry standards and operating systems, which is critical in a public safety environment. This will allow a transition to the next generation 911 network, NG 911, that is slated to occur nationally within the next 10 years. From the Bureau of Emergency Communication, we have Interim Director Lisa St. Helens here to answer any questions or concerns that you may have. Director?
Thank you. As you just said, there's not a lot else to this that I can add. I've brought along with me Maureen Kinzel-Grubbs, who can answer technical questions regarding the contract itself and regarding the phone system that we currently utilize. And I also brought along Gary Bevins with our financial department. So I will turn it over to Maureen. If you have technical questions, she can help you.
Very good. Colleagues, any further questions? Is there any public testimony on this item?
Just wanted to add,
Commissioner
my
Fritz?
understanding is that this will allow texts to 911. Is that correct, or is that another one?
We actually currently have text to 911 right now. This will enable, with the upgraded system, this will enable us to have integrated texting with our CAD system. It's not something that we are implementing straight away with the upgrade that's coming in November. That's going to happen statewide at a later date.
Okay. And does this transition involve the complexity of replacing the entire computer-aided dispatch system that we've done in the last few years?
The actual computer-aided dispatch system, it
Yeah.
does not. This simply replaces the phone system.
Thank you.
Any further questions, colleagues? Is there any public
you very
testimony on
much.
this item?
No one signed up.
Please call the roll.
Saltzman,
Aye.
Udaly,
Aye.
Fritz.
Thank you for your patience and your great work supporting the people of Portland and of Multnomah County. Aye.
Fish.
Aye.
Wheeler.
Aye, the ordinance is adopted. Thank you, and thank you for your patience. Next item, please, Carla.
Item 1013, amend marijuana regulatory license procedure and requirements business regulations.
Colleagues, this is a second reading, but Commissioner Udaly would like to introduce 3 amendments. Commissioner Udaly?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. You had raised a concern last week about one of the amendments pertaining to businesses, established businesses being exempted from the 1,000-foot rule if a new school is opened. So the concern was that our language was more restrictive than the state. So this amendment just serves to align our language with the state language. Amendment number 1, change subsection 14B.130.040E, number 4B, from the ownership of the business changes by 50% or more, requiring a new application, to a new application is required. Amendment 2, add the language and received final inspection approval to the end of subsection 14B.130.050A.6. And amendment number 3, add the language, if ownership of the licensed entity changes by 51% or more, a new application is required, to the end of subsection 14B.130.050A.9.
Second for the purpose of discussion.
Thank you.
And Commissioner Udaley moves, Commissioner Fritz seconds all 3 of the amendments.
Yes.
For discussion purposes. Is there any public testimony?
may I
Commissioner
just
Fritz?
discuss?
Yeah, please.
So I'm a bit confused because Amendment 1 says that if a new application is required, then they would not be grandfathered in. Is that correct? Am I reading this properly? Maybe.
Brandon, please come up to answer Commissioner's questions.
Hello, for the record, I'm Brandon Goldner, Program Coordinator for the City of Portland's Cannabis Program. Yes, Commissioner Fritz, you're correct. So the discussion from last week was about that requirement. If the ownership changed by a certain percentage, you would no longer be eligible for the grandfathering. Some of the discussion last week was a concern that that language was maybe too specific or restrictive, and there was a suggestion that perhaps changing that to simply say, if a new application is required, that you would not be eligible for that grandfathering, so that if our requirements for needing a new application were to change, that this rule would kind of change along with it. Again, that's the same way the state is approaching this issue, and so that's why we changed the language and clarified when you do need a new application.
Well, that makes sense to me, but it doesn't make sense because Amendment 3 then goes back to saying if it changes by 51% or more, a new application is required.
That is correct.
Which doesn't get past our direction that if it's just changing from, the example that was given was an 80% to one owner, a 20% that they shift when the 80% wants to retire. Under this Amendment 3, they would have to apply again, and then they wouldn't get grandfathered.
Yeah, that is true.
So that doesn't respond to the concern that we have.
And I apologize. My understanding of the discussion last week was that there was a suggestion that to simply say, if a new application is required, that would be added to the language for the retailers, and then we could define when is it that you would need a new application. If we want to make changes to that, I'm certainly open. So I apologize if I didn't reflect the intent of the discussion last week.
Commissioner Udaley, can I make a suggestion?
Yes.
So first of all, I am especially grateful for the work that you and your bureau and your team have done to bring this forward. And I thought the hearing last week was very interesting. And this question about tracking state law while also making it clear that we're not the final decider and then figuring out change of ownership, I thought that was spot on. Because we're now talking about very specific fix, which I think for which there's support, would you consider just passing what's before us on a second reading and just taking a week to get council support on the amendments and just bringing it forward as a separate package?
I suppose, I have to say, I do share Commissioner Fritz's confusion about why the 51% language is still in here when the goal was to simply align our language with the state language and not unnecessarily trigger a reapplication process.
Yeah, and to be clear, the intent with this was to say, rather than calling out that if your ownership changes by 51% or more, that would be tied directly to the part about the grandfathering, to simply make it a little more broad and say, if you do require a new application, you wouldn't be eligible, and then to define it elsewhere. And so again, I apologize if that didn't reflect the intent of the discussion.
Well, I'd be happy to have some conversation about it. I think Commissioner Fish's suggestion is good, although I think we could just continue it for another week, because Amendment 2 is what we were asking for, and thanks for that. And that's the main thing in this application, right? I mean, it's the most important thing, is that similar to retail owners not having to wait for final inspection, that certain of the processors would not have to wait for it either. But they would get it, have to be in compliance the following year.
And just to be clear, as it stands now at the state level, if your ownership does change by 51% or more, you will not be eligible at the state level to get this grandfathering either. So just again, to make that point clear.
If we did continue this a week and Commissioner Udaley brought these amendments and we slapped on an emergency clause, it would actually kick in quicker than if we passed it today and brought it back as amendments. So while we would lose Commissioner Saltzman, I think we do have the support to move this.
That's a good suggestion.
Sure. And I apologize for the confusion. This was handed to me this morning, and I thought we had clarity on it, so.
Very good. So I think that's a good resolution, Commissioner Fish, and let's go ahead then and continue this to next week. We have room on the agenda for next week. I'm seeing a head nod, yes. So that item number 1013, to amend the marijuana regulatory license procedure, is continued to next week. Next item, please.
Item 1014, authorize the Washington Park parking lot stormwater line intergovernmental agreement with Metro.
Commissioner Fritz.
Could it possibly get any more in the weeds of things that we, the council, take great responsibility for and make sure we do correctly? I think we can summarize this. It's essentially an administrative action that formalizes a long-standing memorandum of understanding and agreement between Parks and Metro. Staff are here to answer any questions.
Any questions, colleagues? This one, I do agree, Commissioner Fritz. I think it wins the In the Weeds award for today.
Well, it even goes...
There's no detail too important for this city council.
So we've gone from amending the regulatory license agreements for marijuana to now we're in the weeds, Mayor? I think this is a pattern here.
Oh, no.
There's got to be a...
Oh, no, here we go.
I think there's $1 in the fine jar.
Somebody save us. Is there any public testimony on this item?
No one signed up.
Of course not. All right, any further comments or questions? Please call the roll.
Saltzman?
Aye.
Udaley?
Aye.
Fritz?
Well, thank you to my very dedicated and patient staff for sitting here, and I'm sure you enjoyed the previous things as much as I did. Aye.
Fish?
Aye.
Wheeler?
Aye, thank you. The ordinance is adopted. Thanks, Commissioner Fritz, and thank you to your staff, too. I'll second what she said. Next item, please.
Item 1015, amend price agreement with CMTS LLC for on-call temporary engineering and technical support staffing services by $4 million for a total not to exceed of $5,500,000.
Colleagues, anything further on this issue? Please call the roll.
Saltzman?
Aye.
Udaley?
Aye.
Fritz?
Aye.
Fish?
I want to thank Sarah Culp, who's with us today, for what I thought was a superb presentation. Aye.
Wheeler? Wheeler?
Aye, the ordinance is adopted. Thank you, Commissioner Fish. Next item, please.
Item 1016, authorize a competitive solicitation and price agreements for construction management, inspection, and project support personnel for an amount not to exceed $25 million over 5 years.
Colleagues, anything further on this item? Please call the roll. Carla.
Saltzman?
Aye.
Udaley?
Aye.
Fritz?
Commissioner Fisher, it's not so long ago that the $25 million contract going forward would have had both chambers packed and no trust from the community, and I really applaud the way that you've brought back that trust. Thank you. Aye.
Fish?
Thank you very much. Aye.
Wheeler?
Aye. The ordinance is adopted, and we are adjourned until 2 p.m. Thank you.